Watch Dogs is a series I care deeply about. And so, over the last few years, I have reviewed every Watch Dogs game in probably too much depth. And so, here is a full breakdown of the entire Watch Dogs series from its rise with Watch Dogs 1 to its fall with Watch Dogs Legion. What comes to mind when I say Watch Dogs? Is it disappointment, deceit, mediocrity? For a few of you, it's something positive, but that few is a growing minority. And why is that? Simply put, the years have been kind to Watch Dogs, and each year separates us from the E3 demo of 2012 that promoted a game still yet to release. Sure, the idea for Watch Dogs is there, but any comparison to the demo makes it clear that this was not running on current console hardware, and if that wasn't clear, here's the proof. Jonathan Morin, creative director of Watch Dogs, made it clear that the game was not ready to be shown, and was being developed for next-gen consoles that weren't even known at the time. The team didn't know what to expect, or what would be possible on the hardware, but Yves Guillemot insisted that the game be presented, knowing full well there was a high probability that promises would not be kept. We can add that to the list of crimes alongside promoting a toxic work environment and being a French Canadian, but it takes two to tango. When met with limitless presentation, why wouldn't we think that limitless gameplay potential was to follow? Even in those early showcases, Watch Dogs laid its gameplay bare, but it didn't stop the allure of a new intellectual property and the endless possibilities that come with such a new frontier. A world where everything is connected, and becoming less and less fictional has the potential to say a lot. What are the ethics of the government, or anyone for that matter, knowing everything about you? What are the social implications, political implications, criminal implications? Watch Dogs only answers a few of these, and often with little depth. The concept is fresh, but it is supplemented by ideas that could fit anywhere. This is a theme present across all of Watch Dogs. The idea that the game does not need to have hacking. In fact, many of its best qualities ignore the hacking entirely. Its gameplay is at its best with one hand clutching a grenade and the other gripping iron. The story's greatest qualities are the mystery that unfolds. Aidan's response to his trauma and its setting is unique because of its gloomy atmosphere, coat physics included. The hacking is unique, but stays an arm's length away from everything else, and the moments it does intersect are fleeting. If your game that is entirely marketed on a hacking mechanic is still good without it, there may be a problem, or an excellent foundation. Regardless, the qualities here were overpowered by the taste left in players' mouths leading up to the game's release. With such a taste, the internet spit a toxic narrative that Watch Dogs lied to the player about much more than its presentation. What resulted was a rude awakening regarding both the game and the effects of hype culture. This is what warrants a retrospective evaluation. We've had plenty of reviews that focus on what the game was supposed to be or what we were told it was going to be, but the discussion of what the game is and what its qualities are disconnected from the could, would, and potentially should is few. Because unfortunately for Watch Dogs, it fell victim to the very dystopia it painted. A world without privacy and where there's limitless information at the tip of your fingers, but that comes with limitless misinformation too. Statements without context, false narratives. Nowadays, finding the truth is not as simple as using Google, and the best way to know the quality of something is to experience it yourself, or at least play it vicariously through an excessive critique of the game. Watch Dogs stars Aidan Pearce as he begins unraveling the web of criminals, hackers, and fixers responsible for his assassination, which in its failure took his niece's life. Over the next year, Aidan goes AWOL, taking a Waynian response to grief, becoming a creature of the night, preying on criminals, but his superpower is not money or supernatural abilities, it's the city. Through the use of some clever hacking, Aidan has the ability to control multiple parts of Chicago ranging from the L trains to the Transformers. Security cameras become your eyes, steam pipes your weapons, and cutting comms and sightlines allows Aidan to isolate his targets. Aidan's morals are, like his hacking hat, gray, and while his sense of justice is defined, the goal is simply avenging his niece. But in his pursuits, ghosts from his past come knocking at his sister's door, kidnapping her, lighting a fire under Aidan to not only save his sister, but find out who is conducting the symphony of grief, trauma, and mystery that screens his life like heavy rain. So let's not delay any further and enter a world where knowledge truly is power, where someone's dirty secrets are more threatening than a firearm, and one that carries a definitive theme that at every turn is at odds with the player. Welcome to Watch Dogs, and spoilers ahead. While the fidelity of Watch Dogs will age with time, I believe its atmosphere is evergreen. The Windy City is seen in every leaf violently whipping in the wind, and the admittedly janky coat physics accompanying Aidan's every move. It seems to be one of the many issues with the PC port of this game, which while offering the closest we will ever get to that golden E3 demo, is still not ideal. There are bugs throughout this game, and the one you'll see at all times is Aidan's coat flapping viscerally even in the most minor breeze. I don't mean to harp on this too much, but I need to mention this issue because most of the footage doesn't show it. I will almost always stick with a vanilla game for videos as I want to provide an accurate look at what the game will be upon purchase, but this so irrationally annoyed me that I had to do something about it. It was as simple as downloading a mod, but had I not done so, I would have been constantly annoyed with this game. I mean, I wasn't paying attention to the world before because my eyes were always drawn to that damn code, which I imagine is the opposite of the developer's intentions. Aidan as a character is someone who does what he can to present as a blank slate, not for any player projection, but to prevent enemies from discovering weaknesses or patterns that can be exploited. He wants to become the ghost in the machine that occasionally inhabits his vessel, and this is another benefit to Aidan as he intends to blend with the crowd. Aidan in the eyes of CTOS is literally a nameless, faceless bystander, and his rather unassuming and ordinary appearance aids in drawing our eyes elsewhere. Aidan never outright disappears, but takes comfort in our peripheral. We're always looking at what to hack next, the bullets quickly approaching, or the beauty of Chicago. Normally, I wouldn't find Chicago notable at all. It's simply gray with brown and more gray, clouded by rain, but it's the gloomy atmosphere portrayed so expertly that makes Chicago a miserable place I yearn for. It perfectly matches the story's tone. It's a place of grief, tears covering Aidan's vision much like Aidan's grief. It's at its best when it blurs the lens through which we see the world. Chicago during the day is fine, but feels bland compared to the melancholy. I wouldn't call the daytime ugly. The sights of autumn oak and blue skies separated by miles of concrete bring to mind a repose that is only uncanny by accompanying the story. We can't fully appreciate the environments during the early morning because we aren't at peace yet. There's still more to do. This makes the juxtaposed dusk feel as though everything in the game is playing into a central theme, a darker world full of vulnerability, where a morally questionable psychopath toils in the shadows as the good guy, only because those he chases are worse. But this city is not memorable for its weather, lighting, or dystopian stone towers, but for its people who feel alive. In many cities, there are cars on the street, people on the sidewalks, employers, employees, but they never feel real. This is because the player has a basic understanding of what a non-player character is, and sees them as no more than a nameless vessel in a sea of faceless bodies. What Watch Dogs achieves to remedy this to an extent is give them a name, a face, a story, and a dirty little secret. The moment an NPC has a name and a story, they become more than a collection of assets from an assembly line. They feel just a bit more real. We get access to their names, their occupation, their income, and a fact about them. This fact is often something intimate about the person, and the reason this is so engaging is because many people, myself included, love gossip. I relish in scouring the grapevine for juicy secrets and information that I shouldn't know, not for the purposes of spreading, but just for knowing. I like the minuscule rebellion that comes from moving your knowledge into restricted territory. Further, you can look at their texts, listen in on phone calls, and these conversations are often ordinary. It's not often you'll profile someone who's a convicted serial killer, but there is something tantalizing about seeing that Jeff has father issues or that Samantha has IBS. You can't often do anything with this information though, which means that the fun begins and ends with player curiosity. More could have been done with this system from a gameplay perspective. We do have one ability where we can siphon money from someone's bank account, but money comes easily and the places to spend it are sparse. What if we could use our knowledge against the people? Say we profile someone who we learn has changed their identity as part of a witness protection program. We could, in a stealth context, blackmail them, threatening to expose their true identity unless they create a distraction for us, or offer a key into a restricted area. In the same way that within Assassin's Creed we can bribe someone to leave a window open, Aidan could send a text to an associate of the target blackmailing them to slash the target's tires, so when they try to escape by vehicle, it's easier for us. For now, the profiling is set dressing, but the people themselves will still get up to the usual shenanigans. Beatboxing, arguing on the phone, freestyling, playing their music out loud. There's plenty of activities to observe here, and it creates a city that feels as living as it could be. People on the street will react to your actions, and if you wish to interact with someone but you approach in a truck going 80 in a 50 zone, they'll be spooked and run away. The L train that rumbles above you is yet another example of Chicago being a living city, as pedestrians will jump both on and off at their designated spot, and so can you. When you enter the train, things carry on like normal. There's no loading screen, no scripted actions, you simply jump on, and the world moves through you. If you are in the middle of a police chase and attempt to use the train to escape, you'll see that the carts are vacant. People have heard the gunshots and screams approaching the station and have made the smart decision to stay away. These kinds of dynamic reactions are small, but they come together with all the aforementioned to form a world I could get properly immersed in. The police themselves work as expected, though they are enjoyably aggressive in most cases. I found that in the early game, when your vehicles aren't the fastest and your hacks are minimal, evading the fuzz was surprisingly tough. in many cases because they were faster than you. I didn't enjoy the CTOS scan that occurs when police are initially locating you because the search areas often overlap, and at times are faster than your car. If you have a high-speed sports car, you might be able to outrun it, but you can also use a jam comms consumable to help make it out. The problem that arises is that this is a test of attrition, but it's overshadowed by when the police are searching for you. You now have to bob and weave through sightlines and back alleys to escape, and true to the game's themes, you can turn off your car and hide in plain sight. I'll admit, it is a bit immersion breaking when the police stop looking for you after exactly 1 minute, but the tension that comes from parking in a secluded lot, hiding in your car while the police slowly enclose on you like a slasher in a horror flick, were some of the most memorable moments in the game. I do wish that escaping had more feasible means to it, more specifically when it came to blending. During a particular mission, I gapped from a parking lot onto the train tracks and then onto the train during a police chase. The L train was unfortunately empty, meaning I was just riding it and constantly being followed. It would have fulfilled a true next level fantasy to hop into a car full of pedestrians packed like sardines just to hop off in 3 stops like I was never there, lost in the crowd, but alas, that was not possible. I have read that it is possible in other contexts, but I was unable to replicate it, and at that point, if the context is so sensitive, it sours the fantasy anyways. If you do end up in a fight, you'll see that the police hit their shots and shoot first, ask questions later. But it's when you get into a car chase that Watch Dogs shows off some of its best visuals, but worst gameplay. Driving itself is entirely disconnected from this discussion, as it feels great. Compared to the likes of Grand Theft Auto, what many consider to be the gold standard for open world driving, I would say I enjoy it more. Grand Theft Auto's driving feels good, but it's also slippery, and while I won't bother making any arguments for realism, I doubt you or I have gone 90 kilometers down a highway in an ice cream truck, but after some adjusting, I enjoy it just as much as any other open world game. Each vehicle handles differently, though I would have enjoyed the option to perform flips on a motorcycle. A bike is always what I went for, because seeing Aidan's coat flap in the wind at top speed as he clashes against the rain and oncoming traffic is something right out of a Batman movie. You don't have the ability to shoot and drive at the same time, which is disappointing, but as we'll see, is a minor oversight that has been blown out of proportion. The police are not the only things capable of preventing your escape, as the different islands present unique challenges. The loop sees the highest density of cars and people, but also long highways helpful for building up speed, only to take a turn into a large network of tunnels that run below. Alleyways are perfect for evasion or seclusion, and the polar opposite of this is Pawnee. On the outskirts of the city, we see less defined highways and bridges, and more back roads and dirt paths. Because the roads here are more freeform, there's room for jumps, which were less frequent in other districts. This makes the fourth act, almost the entirety of which takes place in Pawnee, more fun. Added freedom and danger put your steering skills to the test, but evading pursuers comes with the same issue. Your options for outrunning the opposition is to drive faster than them, which in the early game won't be possible, or you can engage in the hacking to give you some distance. The reason outdriving the police in the early game is tough is because the beginning acts are in the suburbs, where fast cars are rare. In the average vehicle, you'll need near expert driving to lose a pursuer, and odds are, a new player won't be skilled enough to execute this. But there is a solution, which is to engage with the hacking. You can hack certain objects to give you an advantage. My favorite is opening a garage door, driving through it, and then closing it on the way out to force the police to drive around, near guaranteeing an escape. Opportunities for these are rather rare, and in most cases you simply press a single button to initiate an auto hack. Through a power fantasy lens, these interactions are the peak of presentation. The camera shifts to showcase the destruction you cause and slows down so you can bask in the sight of a police car wrapping itself around a blocker, or to see a car get folded like an omelet after hacking an intersection to cause chaos. The problems occur when looking at what the player actually does to make this happen, which is next to nothing. The player doesn't even need more input necessarily, but making the timing more difficult could remedy how automatic this interaction is. The game has an enclosing square to tell you when exactly to initiate a hack, but what if instead the hackable objects were shown on the minimap, and you had to look behind you to execute the hack? Maybe that makes it too difficult, but then you need to rely more on setting yourself up for an escape. Instead of hacking an intersection at the right time so a pursuer is T-boned as it crosses the street, you could initiate a hack a few seconds prior, allowing you to slip through before there's a 4-car pileup that slows the opponent down. The problem with that now is we lose the spectacle. This is a problem throughout the gameplay of Watch Dogs, the idea that hacking is a unique idea and often looks cool, but in gameplay it serves to replace something that could otherwise be done without. Nearly every tech-related action in Watch Dogs is mapped to a single button. This makes any interaction easily executed, but it also means that hacking requires no skill. This lack of depth would be excusable if the level design accommodated it, offering situations where the planning is what was challenging, not the execution, but that isn't the case, and it doesn't always have to be. The most basic hacks you'll execute is peering through the lens of cameras around the world. Security cams, body cams, laptop cams, anything with a lens you can see through, and through this you can mark enemies so that they're visible through walls. While this kind of reconnaissance is as just detective vision with more steps, it is a unique idea that adds layers to traditional missions. When trailing a target, you don't have to follow closely behind. You can just keep stalking them from the cams. If you need to hack something, you can, through the use of cameras, complete a mission without entering the area, which isn't always possible, but the fact that it sometimes is enough. When traversing the cameras, you need to play around their limited vision, and it's here that we're presented with gameplay that feels engaging. When we know we have to use the cameras, it was fun to try different angles to see which one would have our target in view. When body cams are introduced, you have moving cameras that further complicate things, which is enjoyable, but there's no further advancements. I don't mean to overanalyze the cameras, but it's the only hack with a significant amount of depth. Every other interactable is a press of a button that starts and ends with the immediate cause and effect. And it gets worse, because the cause is always the same, a tap of square. There are 3 kinds of hacks: barriers, explosives, and distractions. Some may only consider 2 of these hacks, as both an explosion and a barrier being raised will cause any bystanders to react. When raising a barrier, you do just that. The game pushes this idea that you're turning the environment to your advantage, but really, you are creating a battlefield that the game could have already set in place. Enemies can use cover too, so the environment is becoming more complicated, and in cases where the game offers 2 whole minutes to prepare an ambush, you end up just activating all the barriers through continual square taps and placing some IEDs. If the remote barriers were replaced by natural cover, vehicles, debris, generators, they would skip the tedium and the unavoidable question of what purpose do these barriers serve outside of being cover. I must admit, there is one practical application, which is that when an enemy is behind cover, you can deactivate it, exposing them. But these moments were rare, and often bypassed by a sharp bullet. Explosives are immediately useful for offering an easy pick on an enemy or 2, but that is where their depth ends. There is some strategy to be had with said free kills, as the explosion will surely draw the attention of those nearby, but this can be achieved through many means, and its result is just an enemy being in position for one of 2 follow-ups, being a bullet to the head or an IED at their feet. There are opportunities to destroy transformers, which will black out an area, but the darkness doesn't serve much of a purpose outside of a negligible detection speed decrease. Keeping said blackout on a timer means enemies need to be in position to be properly executed. Generally, I believe stealth should never be paired with a time limit because stealth is a game of patience and planning. A time limit forces the player to take too many risks, and in Watch Dogs' case, the blackout doesn't assist you in taking down enemies. An ability like the blackout should offer you a limited window to exploit a weakness, but the blackout doesn't create enough of a weakness to justify it. Limiting the invisible vision cones is not enough to warrant the risk associated with acting fast, and chances are you're better off taking your time without the blackout, because what's the first thing that happens when the lights go out? You become alert. The same occurs when jamming comms. You aren't creating a distraction, you're sowing chaos, which hampers a ghost-like playstyle. But hey, maybe it's my fault for asking the game to cater to my needs, rather than tailoring my playstyle to what the game provides. The problem that continually appears is that when you play to the game's strengths, you don't engage in the hacking at all. Let's hold on to this idea while we look back at the stealth. There are lures that can be activated remotely to distract enemies. Once you close the gap, you can either use the silenced pistol or the baton. Cover works reliably, and while the controls take some getting used to, they eventually work well. You find yourself entering cover, slinking around corners, and scanning the room through cameras, finding that many methods of dispatching a target are loud and lethal. This is a problem because once enemies are alert, they will detect you faster, but it is still one that can be played around. This is the extent of the hacking, and a majority of your tools like the IED and lures are ones that are not out of place in any other stealth game. Hell, Spider-Man has remote activated lures. The technology available to Aidan never exceeds or separates itself from the more practical tools we already know. Despite this, stealth is still enjoyed through its most creatively lacking facets. It's not original to move through the shadows with a baton in one hand and a silenced pistol in the other, choosing to execute those in front of you like John Wick, or in my case, attempting to be as non-lethal as possible like Batman but without the money. In fact, Batman is actually a great place to look at where technology could have been taken, as the wealthy vigilante has many gadgets that serve new functions and not simply streamline or reskin previous utilities. In Arkham Knight, Batman had an AI voice synthesizer that could trick enemies into taking radio instructions from their boss. This could easily be a tool in Watch Dogs to move enemies into position, and one that someone like Aidan could pull off given the technology he has access to. Further tools in the environment could be used to Aidan's advantage outside of explosions. What if there were cranes that Aidan could control, moving the heavy cargo they carry right above a group of goons and dropping it on them? At most, we can drop a crane's cargo, but again, these function like a junction box where it's a thoughtless free kill. Instead, what we have is a weak presence of technology, and what few major displays of hacking there are, like blackouts, are stunted by their limited duration and usefulness. When you are in combat, you'll see Watch Dogs is at its best, and at its worst. The gunplay is tight, responsive, guns have kick, and the takedowns are glorious. But again, I have to ask the question, where's the hacking in this? The answer is hidden, literally. Your options for hacking are as slim as it gets, with the highlights being the defense at T-Bone Scrapyard, that contain traps, turrets, and other things for you to use to take down your enemies in between peeking from cover. But that is the peak, with much of the rest of the game being the valleys. The average shootout will see you relying on guns and rather basic shooting that, while having depth, does not see any actual technology. Mostly. The only exception is jamming enemy comms, which gives you some time to reposition, perform a takedown, or otherwise set up your next move. There are some nice ideas present here, like the ability to shoot a live grenade to make it explode early, and the different context-sensitive takedowns like sliding over cover to kick whoever is in front of you looks just as good as Aidan's many pistol-based executions. Focused aggression is the most rewarding playstyle, and is aided by focus, a bullet time mechanic that allows you to quickly pick off thugs who forgot their helmets, and is something I wish every game had. It creates combat that is endlessly visceral and conflicts slightly with the game's tone and plot. Without diving too much into a side tangent, Watch Dogs presents Aidan as a good person who has a few skeletons in his closet, notably a few victims. Despite this, the game gives you plenty of tools to not defend yourself, but actively chew up and spit out thousands of guards by the end of the game. Aidan fights like an animal when controlled by a skilled player, and it's the most rewarding playstyle, to plow through enemy patrols with speed, aggression, and finesse. If you want to achieve this, you need to plan. Maybe this is the true purpose of the stealth, not to thin the numbers, but to analyze your environment and plan your explosive entrance. If you see that there is a heavily armored goon, you know that he must be taken out with a lot of explosives or up close. So your plan could be to isolate the enemy and take down the surrounding lackeys. Combat is at its worst when it's slow, like when going toe-to-toe with Iraq. He's in a suit fit for a juggernaut, and the solution to his heavy armor is to just pump him full of bullets and explosives, running away before he can close the gap with his shotgun. I believe that when these are the lows of combat, we have something special on our hands. But ultimately, the depth here is in rather typical Ubisoft fashion, not taught to you. You aren't shown the finesse combat has, and so you assume there is none, and in fairness, maybe you don't need a game to teach you how to aim and shoot, but it's increasingly odd when we see the tutorials given to the different hacks that grasp at straws attempting to convince you of its value. Oh boy, wouldn't it be cool if you could jam an enemy's comms to stun them temporarily, or distract them with a fake text message? Yes, Watch Dogs, it would be cool, but why is that better than permanently removing the enemy with a bullet to the head? You might argue, as I foolishly did, that you can be non-lethal, but there's no reward to doing so. In fact, the game doesn't even acknowledge it. In a later mission, Jackson ends up in a criminal stronghold, and it's our job to deal with the surrounding thugs. I knew that if we rescued Jax, he'd likely see the dirty work on the way out. So as I maintained up to this playthrough, I used melee attacks to defeat enemies in front of me, using the baton that I had assumed was the non-lethal option. But unfortunately, there was no difference. I was made to feel like a killer. And you know what? Fine. It's more fun to be violent in this game. But then I wonder, why is there a morality system? You can either be a criminal or a vigilante in this game, but what influences your alignment is not what you think. When stopping a petty crime, you get good morality points, but you lose some points for killing the criminal. Killing any criminal outside of these missions is seen as good, but shooting any police officer is seen as bad. Even if the police are as corrupt as they come, you can never shoot back without your reputation taking a hit. Wait a minute. Does this mean Watch Dogs is taking a political stance? Oh, fuck, dude! I kid. I mean, Aidan's morality is outside of the law regardless. In fact, Aidan's entire vigilante persona wouldn't exist without the ineptitude of the police in catching his niece's killer. And now this video is political. Fuck! Ultimately, Watch Dogs does have some politics within it, and some major characters are mayors or are controlling things like elections. The furthest Watch Dogs goes with this is saying that the government is corrupt, which is about as politically lukewarm as saying racism is bad, but I digress. Aidan, despite having a detailed history of criminal activity, is predetermined to be a good guy. Every story mission and side mission, regardless of execution, rewards you with points towards becoming the vigilante, and being such plays a role in the story. So why then is this game at its best when you're tearing through gangsters and torturing those responsible for your niece's death? I wish I knew. But what I do know is that this morality system is just meaningless. Gameplay overall is, ironically outside the hacking elements, really good. Watch Dogs is one of the rare games I crave a return to, because the relentless force of Aidan's moveset is matched with the rain pounding against the pavement. The gameplay may not complement the story or even the premise, but it does aid the atmosphere. In other facets, it's supplemental. Cash can be obtained by hacking someone's bank account, which is a cool idea and concept, but it's the press of a button, often done while you're in the middle of something else. You aren't even slowing down, you're just looking over for a moment. One upgrade allows you to hack a car's alarm so you can quickly enter without alerting anyone, but this changes nothing in gameplay. Despite this, the hacking minigame that bars you off from networks is done well enough. I can understand criticisms that it still stops at the press of square, but the puzzles near the end of the game took some genuine thought. it. I believe it takes too long for said puzzles to ramp up, but I appreciate their infancy here even if later challenges can be as dull as the puzzle resetting itself, which adds tedium as a source of fake difficulty. Fortunately, the level design seems to avoid being stale or too repetitive, offering different contexts for you to commit mass murder. Watch Dogs has one of the strongest openings in a game that I have ever played. The concept is explained quickly, and our protagonist's motives are done the same, but we oddly start at the apparent end of our story. We got the bad guy, and our objective is to shoot him, and of course, not doing so, we move through a populated stadium and use a blackout to mask our escape. This is a near-perfect tutorial that explains the basics of the game and offers an immediate hook to keep players drawn in. Once fully into the game, you'll become familiar with Watch Dogs' act structure, and its different mission structures too. Each act or chapter concerns a character or item that Aidan must attempt to get, with the exception of the first chapter. The first act is the most exciting because all the gameplay is new, but the weakest is easily Act 3. This is because the third act is one of the longest, and yet its goal always feels within reach. But not in the sense that Aidan is so close yet keeps stumbling, but in that the game forces Aidan to take a more complicated approach to a problem he has solved multiple times leading up to it. Breaking into Iraq's headquarters is deemed undoable, and with this we have to enlist the help of someone from the inside. While Bedbug is an interesting character, once this convoluted plan falls apart, Aidan decides to just infiltrate the headquarters anyways, and what sucks is that it's so much fun. You mow through a small army during this mission, and yet it makes every mission leading up to this feel boring, not just because you could have done this from the start, but because the preceding missions had relatively boring concepts. One of said mission archetypes is the stealth infiltration, which is often done by Aidan. You move from cover to cover to sneak by enemies, and mechanically you press X to move, so the challenge is for finding an opening or creating one through distractions and capitalizing off of it. When doing a stealth mission with Bedbug, we must escort him twice through a restricted area, and when doing so, we spy through the cameras and select where we want him to go, using our hacks to create opportunities along the way. Sound familiar? The new perspective and lack of defense is interesting, but not for as long as the game hopes. Again, Watch Dogs is at its best when being an aggressive shooter, and a mission that strips you of the fantasy sticks out as one I'd skip. Don't believe me? It's confirmed when you finally enter the hideout. You enter the hideout to hack into one of Iraq's files, but these files are encrypted, meaning you need to get to the server in person to access them. This is something you do frequently at the different CTOS servers, which must be completed before attempting a mission in a new district. These puzzles were often simple, but a few did stump me for some minutes. The only part of these puzzles that annoy me is that it's the peak. The difference between Iraq's server and the CTOS servers is that you need to get there physically. So what does Aidan do? He enters the hideout and goes full John Wick mode. It's fun, intense, and yet it made everything up to the point not just narratively obsolete, but mechanically boring in comparison. Something rather subjective is that a majority of these missions take place in the slums, which don't offer much in the way of interesting environments. Watch Dogs is at its best when it's in the big city. Long stretches of road, fast cars, and a skyline shrouded by security cameras and dense high-rises. The slums in comparison have rather slow cars, most cover is just rubbled barricades, and the technology is more limited. When it comes to traversal, you don't change whatever way you're driving, you simply just do it slower. This, though, is remedied in Act 4. The mission structure improves come Act 4 as we track down Raymond Kenny. The environment here is more challenging than before as you now have to move through dirt side paths, thin streets, and with cars are more likely bikes that move fast enough. The greatest success of this act is that something actually happens. We achieve our goal in the intended means and in a reasonable time. We find Kenny and get him out in just a few missions, and after what felt like hours of Iraq dragging his heels, this was sorely needed. The actual objectives here play into the game's strengths, which is a shooter power fantasy with some stealth strongholds mixed in. One quest you'll become acutely familiar with is the convoy. On the map, you'll be shown the path of a convoy, and the objective is to destroy it. These missions were always enjoyable because there's a large amount of player choice in how much setup takes place and how they intend to stop the convoy. I like to move down the line and create a barricade of vehicles and IEDs where I think the convoy will stop, meaning the setup takes time, but the execution is near instant. Compare this to a few missions where you're given a time limit to prepare defenses, and we see that the convoys do more for player agency. You now choose your time limit by setting up closer or farther away, and because the site is dynamic, the variables are too. It's a mission that isn't beaten into the ground in the main questline, but does appear frequently in the side content. These missions don't have a ton of room for hacking, which is a phrase I'm beginning to repeat a lot, but the sentiment that's still fun also rings true. I've mostly spoken on the mundane and the basic objectives in between the high budget moments, but I want to now focus on another strength, which is that the story is always presenting something interesting for you to do. If you were to ask me what my favorite moments were, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Do I speak on the levels with the best atmosphere, like when you're posing as Crispin to infiltrate the human trafficking ring? We move through this high security show as we spectate the auction, which is one of the last places in this world to value the individual above their data, even if in a horrific horrific way. Walking through this place of disgusting corruption as a paragon of justice among all the people who want you dead is one of many moments where I intentionally walked slowly, as I couldn't pass up how cinematic it looked. I could speak about the most unique gameplay mix-ups, with the prison being a highlight, as we have to stealthily move through the concrete walls in a bare-bones run that ends with a shotgun massacre and an escape through the roof, through driving along the train tracks. It actually made use of hacking, seeing as Aidan hacked the police system to change his name, and in gameplay we get to use the cameras more to our advantage because our defensive capabilities were limited. Maybe I want to talk about one of the final missions where we finally take down Lucky Quinn, as it's full of narrative reveals, atmosphere, challenging stealth, and it's the point where Aidan abandons his past life and enters his new life as the nameless vigilante, for better or worse. I could go on, but this video is already long enough, and I think the point has been made. There are high points everywhere. Level design is often varied, and when it isn't, it's carried by the gameplay, which is always tight enough to entertain, at least when there is actual gameplay. There are some missions that use hacking as a means of replacing a task that could already be done without it, and other missions aren't much of anything if not displays of atmosphere. Tailing missions, for example, are interesting when used through the cameras, and tailing in a vehicle doesn't happen at all, or does it? When downloading something from a fleeing target, you need to stay within their range to download the hack. At first I thought this was an interesting way of incorporating hacking into gameplay, but upon further thought, this is just a tailing mission with extra steps. These nitpicks are easily overlooked when considering the level variety, and this variety extends to the series of side quests that have nothing to do with hacking and yet tragically are incredibly memorable and fun. Around the map you can find dealers that'll give you a hallucinogenic drug, which act as the excuse for 4 different otherworldly trips. But of course, this is a hacking game, so the title it's given is Digital Trip. Digital trips are a fun side tangent, yet feel so disconnected from the main game, especially the psychedelic trips, which see Aidan flying through the air to the tune of distorted jazz. It's memorable because it's a complete contrast to the rest of the game. In the real world, Aidan is completely lucid, calculating his every move, and the atmosphere is gloomy and grief-riddled. Here, it's just good vibes. Well, almost. I think the detection for some of these flowers is brutal, and some of the later levels become difficult because there will be a small piece of environment blocking your way, which really kills my high. Fortunately, you can harness that anger in the Madness trip, which sees you commandeering a hell charger fit for Robbie Race, and with time limit tasks to keep you occupied. I found that the aesthetic here wore off faster, but maybe my tolerance was getting too high, which continues into the next 2 digital trips, which takes a stealth approach. Alone and Watched see you in a post-technological apocalypse, slinking around corners to hack databases and defeat hidden robots. Both of these game modes are fun enough, but they lack what made the base game interesting, which was the tools and options. In these modes, your tools are limited, and while a bare-bones run can encourage new strategies, it also sows tedium. Too often did these restrictions feel arbitrary, and perhaps I was setting myself up for failure expecting the same highs of the psychedelics, but at least the spider tank is the closest we get to catching our dragon. Piloting the spider tank is incredibly fun, and how the developers came up with this idea is beyond me, but the execution is done well. You move through time-based challenges similar to the Madness trip, but the tank is far more enjoyable to pilot as it speeds up walls and clears buildings in a single bound. You ironically crush the civilians and cars like bugs, collecting upgrades along the way. It's a ton of fun, but our high is fading, and nothing is worse than a come down from a euphoric high. And unfortunately for us, we come down all the way to multiplayer, which actually has some beauty to it. That is, if it weren't covered in buggy blotches and connection issues staining every interaction. The basic online free roam works well enough, well, when it works. Connecting to a friend was outright impossible for me, but during the pre-game free roam it worked as intended, even when connecting to people far away. But again, this was only sometimes, as other times I was debilitated by a glitch that prevented me from moving. I would push a stick forward or hold W and be sent in circles. The remedy for this was aiming down sights, which then let me run in one direction, but it made discovering invaders a crapshoot. Even when the controls work, invasions don't go as planned because the PvP balancing is non-existent. During any point in the main story, another player can invade your game disguised as a civilian. You'll get a notification in a highlighted zone on the map showing you roughly where the invader is. Their goal is to act like an NPC and evade your watchful eye, but you have the profiler to help distinguish the real from the fake. When you discover the fixer, you have to take them down. A kill means victory, but if you cannot discover them within the time limit, you lose. The problem lies in the weapons, specifically explosives and cars. If you have a grenade launcher, you can stun lock and juggle your victim for almost the entire invasion, and you as the victim are powerless. God forbid they run out of grenades. They can just hop into a car and run you over once, back up, hit you again, which creates another stun lock. I know this isn't hard to do because I was able to do it to others, and at first it's funny, but then it gets really old because the encounter ends sometimes seconds after it begins. The invader has the advantage, and it just made it boring. If these stun locking strategies were better balanced, I could have enjoyed this a lot more because the gunplay in other PvP modes was competent even at higher ping. Alternatively, you can invade others without their knowledge in the tracking minigame. It's the same idea, track and steal someone's data, but the victim isn't told told about it, and while this is a fun idea, I'm not sure what the point is. I mean, I was likely silently invaded in my playthrough a handful of times, but so what? I can't praise it much because it doesn't add anything, but it also never intrudes, so I guess it's just a thing and it's here. What is also just here is the racing, which works exactly as intended and offers some solid fun. The hacking genuinely makes a difference here too, as timing plays a larger role when trying to sabotage your opponent. Nothing hurts more than nearly gaining the lead just for someone to hack a barricade, totaling your car. But it's also so satisfying to gain the upper hand through blowing pipes in the ground. These hacks are not free, as they can easily sabotage you, and I've had hacks backfire before. All in all, this was really fun, and that leads into the gunfights too. There's a series of PvP modes that boil down to shooting other players while holding an objective, and these modes were a surprising amount of fun. No doubt in part to Watch Dogs' excellent gunplay. Mechanics translate to multiplayer well, and one taps to the head feels so good. It's when playing against people on keyboard and mouse that the game feels at its best, because you can actually compete on controller. It's not often shooting feels this good on controller, and I can't commend the game enough for it. Many of these modes where you need to take an objective can devolve into 4 or 5 people killing each other over and over in a series of hot potato, but it is still something I could see myself returning to. I wish there were a little more co-op options, but it's not like these days it matters, because finding people to play this with is the biggest hurdle. So with that said, shout out to Roblox Forever for being the most consistent player in all the games. Overall, these game modes were fun enough and are a nice supplement to the main story, especially when you want a break from the doom and gloom of it. The gameplay as a whole is well made, but I just wish hacking played more of a role in its execution. Using cameras to case an objective is the closest we get to hacking being center stage, and the remedies for this are easily visible in this game's sequel. It might be disappointing in a vacuum, but when playing the rest of the series, it further separates this game and always provides a reason for me to come back. Everything here is fun, even if it's not very happy like the digital trips, but man, do most of the other side missions continue into the moody aesthetic, with many of the audio logs being more and more depressing, but also enriching the story to a point where some of the audio logs should have been closer to the story, as without it, certain characters fall to the wayside, and I can tell if you found these audio logs through one decision: to kill or spare Maurice.
No, what happened? Why was she staring at me? Fuck me! And that little girl died. I killed her.
Watch Dogs begins seemingly at the end of your journey. Aidan used to be a fixer, but when a hacking job at the hotel called the Merlot went wrong due to his partner's greed and the presence of a third hacker, he attracts the attention of the mob. When on a Sunday drive with his niece Lena and Pawnee, 2 hitmen were to kill him, and did so by shooting Aidan's tire out, and while Aidan survived the wreck, his niece wasn't as lucky. This led Aidan on a journey to track down the killer, through the help of an anonymous contact at the hacktivist group DedSec. Our story begins with Aidan pointing a gun at Maurice, the gunman, but Aidan can't kill him yet because he needs to discover who is responsible for the hit. After some complications from his charismatic assistant Jordy, Aidan has to make an escape. Aidan's relationship with his sister Nikki and her son Jackson is dwindling, and Aidan has been different since the crash. He's taken his role of big brother a little too seriously, spying on Nikki, and when he discovers that someone is threatening her, he gives chase and tracks down the harasser, which happens to be a ghost from the past, his partner from the Merlot. Damien requests Aidan's help in finding out who the third person was at the Merlot, and after Aidan denies him, Damien kidnaps Nikki. Aidan gets Jackson to a safe spot and begins tracking down leads, playing Damien's game in hopes of rescuing his sister. To help him, Aidan meets face to face with his DedSec contact for the first time to get internal access to the CTOS system. After Aidan's safe house is compromised, he and the DedSec contact Clara take solace in an old CTOS bunker that cannot be traced. In their efforts to find the third Merlot hacker, they end up at a concrete fortress owned by Iraq, the person, and Aidan invades to steal the hard drive that has dirt on everyone, including politicians, which gave Iraq power. Aidan and Clara are skilled hackers, but the encryption on Iraq's files are next level, and they enlist the help of Raymond Kenny, aka T-Bone, to help them. Kenny previously worked for Bloom, the company behind CTOS, but went off the grid after he caused a citywide blackout in 2003. He did this to warn the people that CTOS would be too powerful, but in the process, 11 people were killed. When we find Kenny, he is reluctant to help, but assumably out of guilt or in an attempt at redemption, he decrypts the files, but not before another hacker by the name of Default is able to intercept the download. Default is an incredibly skilled hacker whose sudden intervention is a bit confusing, and after Aidan gets the files back from him, he sort of disappears for the rest of the campaign. But he is important because he reveals that Clara was the one tracking Aidan down, and had an indirect hand in killing Lena. After all these trials, tribulations, and still not having the information Damien wants, Aidan's identity is revealed to the public, and he makes a last-ditch effort to stop playing Damien's game, rescue Nikki, and get his remaining family out of Chicago. This goes according to plan, but not before Nikki and Jackson discover who Aidan is, and more damning, what he has done. Eventually, Kenny decrypts the hard drive, which reveals that the person who called the hit on Aidan is Lucky Quinn, the head of the mob. Aidan has to return to the Merlot, Quinn's base of operations, to kill him. And before doing so, he finds out that Quinn had sent the hit because he thought Aidan knew of the blackmail Quinn had on various politicians. And with that, Aidan puts an end to his life by hacking his pacemaker. As he's leaving, Aidan gets word that a hit has been put out on Clara, and despite his best efforts, Aidan is not able to save her in time. Now that Aidan has achieved his goal and lost many along the way, he decides to leak all the blackmail gathered from Iraq's server, which angers Damien, who has found a way inside CTOS and has control over the entire city. As Chicago is in chaos, T-Bone and Aidan toil away on a virus which eventually blocks Damien out and reveals his location, a lighthouse on the outskirts of the city. Aidan arrives to take him down but finds that Jordy is turned on him. Aidan is able to turn the tables and kill Damien, but Jordy gets away. We then see a montage of the events after the game and how the city is reacting to CTOS, and we receive a final parting gift from Jordy: Maurice in a garage, broken. We get one final decision: kill or spare Maurice. Maurice is easily my favorite character in the entire game. He's posed as the bad guy for the entire plot, and yet that isn't true. In audio logs around Chicago, you can learn more about who Maurice is and why he did what he did, and the answer is that he had to. This is why I can tell if you've heard the audio logs, because anyone aware of Maurice's story knows that he is as much of a victim as Aidan is, if not more so. Let me explain. Maurice worked for the mob because he, like many, fell upon hard times. He wasn't a fixer because he was a bad guy necessarily, but his actions were a matter of circumstance. The problem is, as with any criminal work, once you're in the game, you don't get to leave. Maurice wanted out, but the mob wasn't going to allow that. In turn, his life was turned upside down. He just wanted to leave the city with his girlfriend, and by the end of everything, his love was taken from him.
I screwed up the bitch job. No more chances. I begged him not to kill him. I begged him to kill me instead. And the son of a bitch said he was feeling generous. He wasn't gonna kill her. He's gonna send her to an auction instead. A fucking auction. How do I get her out of that? They got tracking shit on the girls there. Get them so fucked up on Snack, don't even remember their name. Oh, Christ! Abby! The sick fuck who called me. He said that that was clean. I was free to live my life. What fucking life have I got?
By the time we find him, he's already broken, having had everything taken from him, and when we return at the end of the game, we see that he's been through every layer of hell. Throughout the entire story, Maurice has been tortured by Jordy to the point where he can barely think straight, and it's in what could be his final moments that Watch Dogs' many mysteries begin. Maurice does not beg for his life. In fact, he encourages Aidan to end it, as he has nothing left. But after a while, he begins repeating numbers, specifically 1, 2, 3, 5, always struggling to say 4.
1, 2, 3, 5.
There's a few theories as to what these numbers refer to. The first has roots in Maurice's guilt. Maurice made it clear that he never wanted to kill Lena and that his intention was to scare Pearce. The license plate of presumably Aidan's car during the crash contains the numbers 1, 2, 3, 5. Since all of his current torture is caused by one fatal mistake, perhaps he cannot get those numbers out of his mind, in the same way he can't get Lena's face out of his mind. I've seen this one a few times online and there's just one problem with it. That isn't Aidan's license plate. Maybe it's an obscure cutscene shot, but I couldn't find any instance where that license plate showed up. Another theory that holds some water is that Jordy is employing a common torture technique against Maurice, in which the victim is tasked with counting to 5, but has pain inflicted as they reach the number 4. Eventually, the victim will struggle to say the number 4 in sequence because it results in pain. Maurice's continued repeating of the numbers could be an attempt to regain his bearings on reality, and the frustration could be the realization that he is still mentally broken. The final theory many get behind is that he is repeating the Fibonacci sequence. Through a different set of audio logs, we can find there is a program called Bellwether, that, as the name implies, tracks data and its influence. But it seems that in the Watch Dogs universe, the CTOS can achieve subliminal messaging, and the impact of such messages are gauged by Bellwether. Angelina Balik, a Bloom employee, decided in an audio log to drop the Fibonacci sequence into the system and see if it bounces back. This could be why Maurice repeats the numbers, as they are the first few digits of the sequence, barring the first two. The true sequence is 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, and so on, but I imagine skipping the first number is for brevity's sake. We see this all over the CTOS, and Maurice repeating the numbers, someone going through years of torture, thus being highly susceptible to influence, acts as more or less proof that Angelina's experiment worked, in a rather horrifying way. Further proof takes place in a side quest where Aidan has to track down a serial killer, and the bodies are found next to a series of numbers, all of which are part of the sequence. There are other instances of the sequence, but I think I've shown enough to make a solid case. The only issue with this theory lies with Angelina's plan, and a lack of detail surrounding it. I would like to have known more about this conspiracy and how it would work, but this is mostly all we see, which might be a praise given that this is much creepier when we don't know the details. But back to Maurice. Aidan's comment about he and Maurice not being so different, while a tad cliche, is abundantly true. Both had their loved ones taken from them, and the largest difference between the two is that Aidan got a second chance. Maurice lost his wife, lost everything, and even after that, he faced months of guilt and eventually days, potentially weeks, of torture to the point that his psyche is in shambles. Sure, Aidan helped Maurice in a way as he kills Quinn, the one responsible for his wife's fate. He stops an auction and other human trafficking excursions, potentially saving Maurice's wife in the process or at least avenging her, and hey, he maybe then gives Maurice a chance to start over, find some semblance of normal, which is what he was fighting for. His final out was taking down Pearce. One last job to secure what he believed was freedom from the mob. He was never meant to kill Lena, but when Maurice had his gun pointed at Aidan, he saw the kid in the back seat and got cold feet, opting to instead shoot the tire causing the crash, hoping they would survive and understand the message. And yet, after everything, there's a chance that Maurice was successful. On that day that Lena died, Aidan did too. It was the beginning of his transformation into the Fox. When we pick up as Aidan, he is lifeless, his voice in a constant growl, his face permanently scowled, and all of his actions are meticulously chosen. This isn't to say he's a blank slate, he has clear motivations and values, but it's as though a large part of Aidan died when Lena did too. And the birth of the vigilante is a trauma response in Lena's name, because if Aidan can dedicate the rest of his life to stopping bad people, then his guilt can be soothed. With each criminal empire brought to the ground, and with each thug taken down, Lena's death isn't for nothing. It's in the final encounter with Quinn that we see Aidan truly accept the role of the Fox, and leave his old life behind. His family is presumably by this point far away from Chicago and safe, and he has finally achieved his revenge. And in a subversion of expectations, Aidan revels in the victory. He explains that he feels like a weight has been lifted off of his shoulders.
Quinn's dead. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I feel empty, right? I'd be lying to myself. I finally feel awake, like I can breathe again. And Lena? Nothing can change her death. But maybe I can still do something that'll make a difference.
I appreciate that Aidan didn't feel remorse, or that getting revenge didn't solve his problems. He set out to bring justice to someone who would otherwise never have been held accountable. And Aidan was the only one capable of doing it. Anyone else who wanted to touch Lucky Quinn had piles of blackmail to be used against them, and enough henchmen to make any physical fight over before it began. Anyone who hopes to take him down needs to be someone with nothing to lose. A blank slate, a ghost. And these prerequisites are exactly what many misunderstand about Aidan. Aidan is not a bland character, but his environment requires him to appear as such. He must calculate his every move, word, and action to blend in as much as possible to not allow any cracks to form. This never perfectly works out for him, as when he first meets Clara, she sees right through the tricks.
I'm sorry I was rough before.
I know what you were doing, trying to intimidate me. Very textbook. Stepping into my personal space, the stare, physical contact. You are trying to look for cracks. So did you find any?
Some have criticized his designs for being bland, but that's the point. Aidan needs to blend in with the crowd. He needs to be just another nameless face, and he comes to understand this role throughout the game, something many have misunderstood. Some have criticized Aidan for not having a proper character arc, but I feel the real issue, if you deem it so, is that Aidan's arc isn't blatant. He does not grow as a person over the course of the game, but he eventually realizes his role in all of this. And we as the player learn more about Aidan through each mission. When the game begins, Aidan is a blank slate like many people see him, but by the end we know his motivations, which are not simply revenge, it's about justice. His motivation is somewhat revenge-based, but as previously stated, it's also a matter of repenting. Aidan blames himself for Lena's death, and he wants to keep his remaining family safe at all costs. There are further audio logs that mention where Nikki and Jackson are after the game, and it's revealed that they are entirely off the grid, where even Aidan doesn't know where they are. And while he wants to reach out and reconnect, he knows it could jeopardize them, and that's assuming they'd want to forgive him anyways. It should be noted that even though Aidan is ultimately doing good, he's still a killer. A lethal protagonist protector that in gameplay murders potentially thousands by the end of the campaign, and in canon still kills a handful of people. Even if it's justified, it's hard being affiliated with an outlaw, and one that is capable of so much. Almost everyone who gets involved with Aidan dies by the end of the story, and those who don't are still scarred by his actions. Jackson, when being rescued by Pearce, has full view of the Fox in action, through the security cameras, and Aidan kills a small army. Jackson is rightfully scared, and I believe this scene was meant to have larger implications because Aidan has barely any reaction to this. What's worse is that in said mission, I had already known Jackson was watching and I decided to non-lethally take down the enemies, but the cutscenes didn't change. Which brings me to the first major issue with the story, which is the moral standing of Aidan Pearce. Aidan is a morally great character. He'll kill if he has to, or if the death of someone is a net positive on society, functioning like any anti-hero or lethal protector. The problem is that Aidan endangers people's lives far more than the game likes to call attention to. And the moment you question any of the accidents here is enough to break immersion. The next few points are going to seem like nitpicks, but bear with me because they will become more relevant in a moment. Let's look at your primary means of income, which is hacking people's bank accounts. Is this morally okay? Maybe so, maybe not. Perhaps hacking someone in the slums for a few $100s is enough to push them under the poverty line. Further, if someone is under the poverty line, they may get desperate for cash and look to crime to make ends meet, which means you could be creating another Maurice, and eventually another dead niece. That, I'll admit, is a stretch, but let's look elsewhere. Each hack causes damage to city infrastructure. Blowing a steam pipe would cost thousands, and hacking an intersection creating a pileup to stop an enemy is almost guaranteed to leave someone injured or dead. Then let's look at how many cars you actually steal in the game and the amount of dead bodies left in your path. All people that could have gotten second chances. Now this has no bearing on the story, but it definitely has bearing on the morality alignment, which I'm convinced was added for the sake of having a morality meter, or that its ideas were heavily cut by the time of the full release. It impacts two things, the police and the radio. When driving around, you can hear the news talking about how the people either love you or hate you, and on a good path, you'll see that citizens are less likely to call the police when you commit crimes, but on an evil route, civilians will sometimes call on sight. You'd rarely know this though, because the game near forces you down the morally good path. Every mission rewards a ton of points to the good side, and every side mission offers the same. What gives you points to the opposite side is injuring civilians and killing police officers. So actually trying to go down the dark path requires an insane number of police shootouts, and even then, after a few missions, you'll be back on track. Now where this impacts the story is that some people see Aidan as a monster, i.e. Jackson when Aidan rescues him or when Nikki finds out that he's the Fox, but the general public likes him so much that they are willing to hide information about him from the police. My issue here is that there shouldn't be a morality gauge at all because it muddies Aidan's character, and it prompts far more questions than answers. Keep Aidan morally gray, keep him complex. Don't devolve to a simple bar that gauges public perception. No matter which way you slice it, Aidan's morally gray. And I mean, the first person we see him working with is Jordy, a hired gun that is completely psychotic in the best ways possible.
I called the cops.
You did.
Oh, yeah, true story. So, cops arrive, and Maurice's little band of brothers arrive, and pow, 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 pow.
Jordy, tell me you're joking.
No, I called them too. Look, we get a messy altercation at the end of the game. You and I slip away undetected. You'll appreciate the plan tomorrow.
Jordy showcases one of the plot's greatest assets, which is its sparse humor that always lands. Jordy is the opposite side of Aidan's coin, who isn't in it for revenge or justice, but rather for the money, and he seems to enjoy it a little too much.
So, people like this feel nice and secure living way up here. I mean, these people just had a simple chain lock on their door. I guess they want to have a good look at the pizza guy before they open it all the way.
Jordy is old school. He presents well and never leaves loose ends untied. And while we don't learn much of him, he's always a fun break from the tension. But the best humor comes from our first meeting with Clara, and it might be my favorite joke of the entire series.
Bad boy.
What?
Bad boy, 17.
What the fuck, man?
Clara's character shines most on consecutive playthroughs. She, like many, is motivated by guilt, and it's in the scenes mentioning Aidan's family that we see her become quiet or avoid the topic entirely. We eventually learn that she was the one leaving flowers at Lena's grave, and that she and Aidan are both fighting for the same thing, justice. I enjoyed seeing their friendship evolve through the game, and we can see very small windows in which Aidan's personality actually shines through, but of course, the one person he opens up to dies just days later. Raymond Kenny is yet another character driven by guilt, but unlike Aidan and Clara, T-Bone initially decided to run from his problems, but with the help of Aidan is able to try and right his wrongs. Ray has a vendetta against the CTOS, and it's with him that we get some more, albeit unintentional, comedic relief. I say unintentional because when playing as Aidan, we have nothing but harsh grunts and sparse words, yet T-Bone offers more personality with some American twang. A grungy redneck is a perfect addition to this band of misfits, and his morals are strong, which I'll expand upon more when we cover the expansion that takes place a year after this game, Bad Blood. Damien was a shitty villain. I know I'm coming out swinging on this one, but I just don't feel like he had a compelling motivation. There's this idea that he suffered too, something he alludes to very on, but he becomes so irredeemable by the end that any suffering is retroactively justified. He also lacks a screen presence, making any calls or cutscenes with him boring in comparison to other antagonists. I found Quinn more interesting despite seeing less of him because he had a direct role in the story, and his introduction was stellar. Damien ultimately seemed like a good means of pushing the plot along, but not much else. The same can almost be said for Iraq, and the largest issue with his character is just how long we spend getting to him. I enjoyed him more than Damien because while he didn't pose a real threat to Aidan, his screen presence was off the charts. His voice actor really delivered with his performance, and made him one of the most memorable characters despite much of the gameplay surrounding him being rather dull. Then we have the less character and more entity of DedSec. DedSec is presented as a shadowy organization, not unlike Anonymous. There isn't much of a hierarchy within DedSec, but it does have leaders, or at least people who decide who gets in and who is kicked out. The most interesting part of DedSec in this game is just how different they are to future iterations. By the second game, DedSec is seen as less of an all-seeing big brother and more of a lousy group of random kids. I can still appreciate their portrayal in both Watch Dogs 2 and Legion, but now that I've seen how they work in this game, I understand the disappointment in their presentation later in the series. Ultimately, the story in this game is atmospheric and really interesting. I enjoyed seeing Aidan transform from someone on a quest for revenge to someone in it for the greater good, even if his means of doing so are questionable at times. The story's pacing was well done despite dragging in Act 3, and the only segment I would outright take out of the game was Default's minor appearance. He appears just after you steal the data from Iraq to complicate plans, and we stop him in one mission, which felt as though it was there for the sake of it. In a vacuum, it's a great mission, but its relevance to the plot felt forced, especially when we just spent 2 hours trying to download Iraq's data. Otherwise, this is the most interesting plot in any Watch Dogs game. The other games had strengths, such as the moment-to-moment dialogue, which was much better in 2, and certain moments in Legion are the best in the series, but the tone and story told here is the best we have, and it only expands in Bad Blood. Bad Blood is an expansion for Watch Dogs that supposedly takes place a year after the events of the main game, but I think that is a misconception. There's a radio segment that plays early in the DLC that discusses the events of the main campaign, namely Default's run-in with Pearce, and it is reported to have happened last month, meaning the events of the game could not have taken place a year after. Perhaps this was an oversight from the writers, but I thought I should mention it nonetheless. This expansion sees you playing as T-Bone, who is on his way out of Chicago, but before he leaves, a ghost from his past comes to haunt him, namely Default. Just before T-Steak is about to leave, he gets a call from Tobias, a side character from the main game, and asks for his help. Once helping him, T-Bone catches wind of fixers looking for both him and Tobias. After following a trail of informants, they find out that the fixers were hired by Default. Once investigating more, Ray finds that Default has a vendetta against him because his brother died during the blackout of 2003, and Default wants revenge. When attempting to track him down, Default eventually traps him in a room with all of the victims' families, and they vote on whether or not Ray should die. Despite a speech that explains his intentions and his guilt that he felt for the last decade, the people still decide that he should die. At the last second, Tobias is able to help Kenny hack into Default's hideout and reroute the poisonous gas, pumping it into his office instead of Ray's chamber. It's a short story that cleans up the loose ends left behind in Watch Dogs and allows us to play as a fan favorite. Aidan is brought up on a few occasions in this DLC, and by the end we hear that Aidan and T-Bone plan to team up to take down Bloom and continue doing their vigilante thing. At first, the DLC is rather jarring because T-Bone speaks far more than Pearce ever did and carries a more pronounced personality, but it makes the conversations between chapters more interesting and it lends itself better to the short runtime. Aidan can get away with leaving tidbits of motivations and personality around because we had an entire game to figure things out. Here it's much more straightforward, meaning if you didn't like Aidan, then there's a good chance you'll like T-Bone much more. Tobias got on my nerves more than he did for others, I imagine, but the budding friendship between him and Raymond entertained. The gameplay here is where Bad Blood is at its best, and also where the whole game is at its best. Raymond plays the same as Aidan, having the same abilities too, but instead of a baton he uses a wrench and a stun gun. His most notable change is with Eugene, his RC car that is capable of hacking things for him and even taking down the occasional guard. This car within the DLC did not get too much use, but it was interesting to see the seeds planted here that would eventually blossom into the RC car in Watch Dogs 2. Otherwise, mechanics are the same here as they were in the base game, which is no issue whatsoever. What is noticeably different is the context in which you utilize those mechanics. Mission structure is far more varied, and even when it falls back on the simple task of clearing a room, the environments offer greater challenge. When sneaking into one area, you'll have to avoid traps and other security, and when sneaking into another, you'll need to move through a mansion, allowing for claustrophobic stealth that stands out as one of my favorite moments in the game. Even the basic camera hacking is given newfound fun, as in a few instances, those cameras have guns mounted to them, which offer another means of pressuring an opponent behind cover. One of the final missions sees you defending your home base against invading fixers through their use of traps, and one's even more abundant and elaborate than that of the main game. The environments like the final push against Default are memorable, and enemy layouts were difficult, leading to a DLC that seemingly never slowed down. Overall, I found Bad Blood to almost be hard to discuss. Everything here is simply done well, and there isn't much new to speak of that isn't a slight remedy to the main campaign or building off the ideas presented presented there. The game wraps up some loose ends regarding Kenny, and we get a good idea of what Aidan has been up to, notably being the same old shenanigans, but also baking.
Preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. With a wooden spoon. Mix your butter into the mashed bananas. Use a large mixing bowl. Mix in the sugar, egg, and vanilla. Lightly sprinkle in your baking soda. Mix vigorously. Add your flour. And mix. Pour your mix into a buttered loaf-shaped pan. Bake for 50 minutes. Cool for 10 minutes. Remember the most important step. Enjoy.
Yo, 15 minutes, my fucking ass. I put that shit in for 20 and it's raw as fuck in the middle. Look at that. Aidan, what are you doing? That is just battered. Like, that's not even... the fuck? I mean, the ends look good though. Look at that. I really enjoyed Bad Blood for being more of the main game and not overstaying its welcome. It was a solid addition to the main campaign and works beautifully as an epilogue to Aidan's story. Something I came to realize about Watch Dogs is that while the game is exceptionally well made and I would recommend it to anyone, hacking plays a surprisingly small role in the game. In gameplay, the hacking was a press of a button outside of cameras. If an enemy was standing in front of an explosive, you tapped a button to take them out for free. And the same was true with driving. In the story, there were many instances where the hacking didn't affect the story. I mean, one of the more significant goals, getting Iraq's hard drive, specifically could not be done remotely, eliminating the entire fear and intrigue associated with hacking. Hacking is scary because it happens without you knowing, and anyone could be the ghost in your machine, but we don't really see that materialize. And when we do, it's fleeting. In combat, hacking plays nearly no role, and again, this isn't bad because the gunplay here is top notch, but it is also strange, and it's one of the many expectations that shattered upon release. Sure, Bad Blood remedied these issues to an extent, but it was almost too little too late. What is most interesting about Watch Dogs, especially in retrospect, is that its dystopia that it has created is not far off from our current reality, and in many ways we are past this age of insecurity. We already live in a world where there's security cameras on every corner, and while entire cities aren't controlled by one operating system, we certainly see digital blackmail used all the time. I would have liked to have seen some commentary on the ethics of surveillance within the game. For example, facial recognition software could help us catch criminals on the run or ones hiding in plain sight, but what if the computer is wrong? Furthermore, we have a new issue that even Watch Dogs couldn't predict: AI. We can blackmail someone with photos of them committing crimes, but what if those images aren't real? How would a society react if the integrity of images and audio recordings were destroyed? Many pieces of media saw these issues as being far in the future, but that's happening right now. Don't believe me? Listen to this. I got a 12-pack of that gorilla. That shit you can only find walking along the Hajish transport paths in Azerbaijan. I'm smoking on Bhutanese garden-grown Dark Evil pack. They watered this with the blood of 36 dragons. Shit so purple it should be asking me, where's Ronald? This shit will turn your pacemaker off. Nuclear levels of sour. Lung-slaughtering necromancer kush. Shit got diamonds on it, so you know that THC to CBD ratio is fucking swag. A whiff of this shit. Yeah, that nefarious sorcerer moongrass. This shit straight out of K-Lid. This shit is what shot Tupac. Peace. That was an AI-generated recording of me, and while it isn't perfect, it's getting close. How long before your favorite YouTuber is pushed off the platform because an AI used their voice to say heinous things? This is all food for thought that I'd like to see in hopefully another entry in the Watch Dogs series, but I'm getting a little distracted. Let's get back to the controversial game that started the series. The release of Watch Dogs was not kind, and this led to some of the game's other weaknesses being blown out of proportion. Outlets like What Culture, in a rather intelligent move, capitalized on those like many others, creating entire lists for why the game sucks, and their reasons, and yes, this is real, were minigames suck, you can't shoot while driving, the landmarks are different, and more. The justification makes it even further apparent that this was done to capitalize off of a hate mob. Yes, What Culture, nobody would pay $60 for a game where you participate in a ball-finding minigame, but that's not the game. Yes, the landmarks are different, but calling that inconsistency, one that you know was done for copyright purposes, infuriating? Be real. An even worse reason is that NPCs curse too much, and again, this is real. Clara's design was made to show off cleavage and be edgy, making it embarrassing to play around others. Admittedly, some of the criticisms here, like the graphics downgrade and the Ubisoftification of the open world, are valid, but otherwise this is a poorly made hit piece that is far more embarrassing to publish than playing Watch Dogs ever could be. The point here is that with all this buzz led to a warped view of the game. Watch Dogs, despite its pre-release claims, did many things exceptionally well. And if you were one of the people that loved this game, then the future of Watch Dogs is as dystopian as it gets. The reception of Watch Dogs was not a kind one, and while many loved Aidan, the gameplay, the ideas, and the world, many did not. There were just as many that felt Aidan was a bland character, that the story was boring, or that the gameplay was bad. And couple this with the controversial release and we have a game with a heavily misunderstood reputation, with too many people focused on what the game could have and potentially should have been, and not for what it is. And Ubisoft intended to correct that. In some ways this worked, and in others, it completely backfired. The story and general tone of the next entry would be a step in an entirely new direction, and while its gameplay was vastly improved, was the change worth it? I initially believed so, because I misunderstood Watch Dogs. I believed everything I read online, and I let the opinions of others cloud my perception of the game, and that's where a lot of fans might have misunderstood this game too. Now that I've replayed the game after playing Watch Dogs 2, after Legion, after enough time, I can view the game not for what it was, or what it could have been, but for what it is. And what it is great. To say the first Watch Dogs game was received poorly would be an understatement. Its finished product was nothing like what was shown in previews, and the game, to many, was disappointing. Aidan Pearce was a well-written character, but Ubisoft were too afraid to put the spotlight on him, instead only allowing his most unlikable qualities to shine through. One such quality was his hacking ability, which for a game all about hacking was bare bones, leaving Watch Dogs to function better as a John Wick simulator rather than a hacking game. Despite this, the general public came back around to Aidan, with even myself making a video talking about how great the game is in spite of its release. What further aided Watch Dogs was that it released in 2014, just months before Assassin's Creed Unity, causing many to look back at Watch Dogs and consider that it may have been treated too harshly, but it was too little too late. No amount of retrospective praise could save Ubisoft from looking at the state of their heavy hitters in 2014 and deciding to make a drastic change. One such change was in Watch Dogs 2. When we first got a look at this game, you'd be right to think it was a reboot of the series. The tone had changed entirely, its world much brighter, its characters had character, and its hacking took center stage. But this shift and the success that came from it caused irreparable damage to the franchise. We now had two entries in a series that were worlds apart, and two fan bases sitting on either extreme. We can talk theoretically about how this would affect the series moving forward, but there's no need. Look at Watch Dogs Legion, a game that feels like the worst of both the first and second game. Now, there's plenty to enjoy about Legion still, and eventually I will dive into that, but for now I want to look at Watch Dogs 2 and see how it is in many ways the antithesis of the first game, and how it, to the series' own detriment, redefined what a Watch Dogs game is and could be. This is Watch Dogs 2, and the irreparable damage it did to the series. Something you may have noted is that while I think Watch Dogs 2 split the fan base in two, I didn't call it a bad game, and that's part of the issue. Watch Dogs 2 is, in my opinion, one of the best Ubisoft games released. Without flaws? No. But I hope throughout this video I can show you how many great qualities it has. To address the elephant in the room, I already have a video on Watch Dogs 2, but I wanted to revisit the game simply because the video I made 4 years ago now was terrible. Audio was bad, the script was poor, and while I don't intend to redo every video I've made, when I feel I severely didn't do a game justice or that my opinion has changed significantly since the video came out, I'll likely take another stab at it. With that out of the way, I want to begin by looking at the tone of Watch Dogs 2, specifically San Francisco, to see, in its purest form, just how much of a change it was from Chicago. San Francisco is a joy to explore, much more so than Chicago, and much like Chicago, it is a perfect canvas to build its story upon. Chicago made sense for Aidan's story. The constant downpour was reflective of the game's bleak outlook on Aidan's life. San Francisco presents a brighter approach that parallels the story's tone, one of lackadaisical freedom and lively fun. It's a backdrop that elevates the campiness of Watch Dogs 2 in a way that no other city could. This doesn't excuse the issues with this game's tone, or the dissonance within it, but this strength can't be overlooked. If a brighter, happier story is going to be told, this is a great place to do so. Ubisoft has always excelled in creating detailed worlds, and San Francisco follows suit, but it's different, it feels more alive, and it contains the most showboating from Ubisoft. Plenty of side activities here of which you are never forced to complete see you simply exploring the city and learning of its people. There are quests that see you taking pictures of landmarks and graffiti, and another questline will see you in the position of an Uber driver, basking in the slice of life that San Francisco provides. It creates a sense that Ubisoft knew that they had achieved something great, and intended on showing it off, and they earned that right. It's gorgeous. Especially now that we're a few years out, looking at this slice of the world during a period now historicized feels like time traveling, with the added novelty of traveling back to a time I once existed in. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You thought you were gonna enjoy your stay here? Yeah, strap in buddy, the fog's coming. When the fog rolls in, your vision is screened to the point where traversing the ocean is like surfing in an endless void. The only structures visible are the monolithic bridges like a colossus in the distance. I never thought the rain of Chicago could be topped, and truthfully it isn't, but the fog comes respectfully close, and when it comes to the sun beaming down on the city, it's no competition. Watch Dogs 2 is downright gorgeous. NPCs in the first Watch Dogs were good, but not necessarily for anything they did, and rather for who they were. The profiler was an ingenious way of making these people feel like people. A person on the side of the street isn't more than a collage of polygons, but when they have income, a name, a secret, they become characters, and that's just as important as the city itself being a character. Something I noticed in other reviews, my own included, is that in certain games like Spider-Man, New York is seen as this individual, almost separate from the civilians. Sure, the civilians are mentioned in that, but they are described in the same way one describes the buildings, set dressing. A game like Watch Dogs that aims to bring those individuals to life allows us to view the city through a more humanist lens. Not a collage of concrete constructions or a map to be explored, but a place, defined by its collective of individuals. This is difficult to achieve in a game though, because we will always be inhibited by our level of interactivity with the world. There are still remedies, the most notable being world building. Audio logs, environmental storytelling, and history help bring a world to life. Even games like Horizon Zero Dawn, where the amount of humans are significantly lower, is able to have an engrossing world through world building, even if this still presents a world that is composed of stories, past events, not the here and now. San Francisco is a living city because it has a past, it has a future, and it has a present that we can see and interact with. Here's a fun game. Load up Watch Dogs 2 and follow an NPC around. They don't disappear, they don't simply walk the same route. In my case, I came across a woman named Isabel Wang, who had a sizable yearly income and some interesting internet search history. I also came across my recording software that completely shit the bed, so now my footage looks like this. In a split second, I can learn a ton about this person and infer even more. I know that despite her income, she dresses casually, and her vehicle, while nice, isn't anything outside of her income bracket, so she's not frivolous. Perhaps this can be used to infer the economic state of San Francisco, as it is a tech hub and thus an expensive place to live, but it could also mean that Isabel is smart with her money. How I learned of her vehicle is that I followed her, for scientific purposes, and I saw her get into her vehicle and drive away. As I explored, I saw even more NPCs just going about their day, and this was something the first Watch Dogs excelled at too. Sometimes people would just be dancing around and we can join in. Sometimes they're on the phone talking with people, but the point is that the people are always doing something, and that helps make the city feel alive. NPCs walk along the street, have generic dialogue in reaction to your actions, and are as deep as their model, but people have conversations unrelated to you. They have things to do, they fight, they make mistakes. And the citizens of San Francisco fooled me well. The humanity of characters is something this game achieves well across its story too. Your friend's dialogue is always staggeringly human, and though the writing has received criticism, and that's something we will address later, the delivery is top-notch, as are the cutscenes. The cutscenes in Watch Dogs 2 are unlike any other game I've played. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say it's like a cheesy sitcom. There's plenty of points where a laugh track wouldn't be out of place.
You've got a weird relationship with technology, you know that, right?
Take any cutscene and look at the non-speaking characters and you'll see what I mean. Characters fiddle with things in the background, they have subtle reactions to what's being said. They sometimes look directly at the camera as if to say, "Are you hearing what I'm hearing?" This of course reflects the lighter tone of the game, and many have taken issue with this direction, but I'm part of the people who love it, even if I understand the hate it gets. Many of the issues with Watch Dogs 2 can be traced back to the drastic shift in tone from the first game, and the cutscenes do the same. Based on the cutscenes alone, ignoring the story, it would be difficult to tell that these two games are from the same series. In fairness, the UI feels consistent with the series, and I appreciated the overhauls to the profiler, and I like that you use your phone to navigate menus. Also, there are actual dogs in this game, so on top of being a watchdog, I can watch dogs too in Watch Dogs 2. Just one of the many citizens of San Francisco is Marcus. Marcus has a personality that is the antithesis to Aidan. They may believe in the same morals, but Marcus's personality continually shines through, at times to his own detriment. He has fun with his pseudo-vigilantism and doesn't hide his personality behind trauma, but I need to admit something. I cannot stand Marcus's outfit in this game. In the beginning mission, it's fine, but afterwards he plasters his clothes with DedSec logos and artwork, and I just couldn't stand it. I normally try to use the canon clothing, but I'm sorry, I couldn't do it here. In fact, this is an issue I take with most of the clothing options here. There are plenty of clothes that are all slightly different shades of the same color, which means finding synergy with your outfits is difficult, and I couldn't find anything I liked, so I just went with a boring all-black outfit so I could at least justify in my own headcanon that it was for a tactical advantage. Games always do this, where they have the same base model for a piece of clothing, but only a few color options for it. Why not have more? It must be a design issue that I'm not privy to, but at least these shoes were cool. Every other character has style and personality that shines through in just about every interaction with them, and it makes this DedSec crew one of the most memorable, except for Horatio, and we'll get to him later. Even if fundamentally this DedSec is nothing like what we've been told, I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this portrayal of the group. Everything from their laid-back approach to hacktivism to their headquarters, which is called, and I shit you not, the hackerspace, shows us a theme in Watch Dogs, which is the power that technology provides you. Marcus and friends are just as efficient, capable, and smart as Aidan, but their personalities say otherwise. Aidan is brooding, works on the ground, ran with criminals. He doesn't have a base, he has a bunker, a hideout. Marcus is smart and has a fierce, rebellious heart, but physically neither him nor the rest of the crew can match Aidan, and yet through their hacking know-how, they're able to become something bigger than themselves. Yes, it's ridiculous that people with memes like this on the wall, or people as socially awkward as Wrench, are technically the same people capable of taking down corporations, but I believe that one of Watch Dogs' themes, specifically once we get into Legion, is that the individual, no matter who, is capable of bringing about change, and this cast supports this statement. The people of San Francisco are not the only ones to see this depth, as the gangs around town feel alive too. It's not uncommon to see gangs and the police who in some exceptional irony operate just like a gang, getting into altercations, causing shootouts, arrests, and for the smart player, distractions. When I attempted to take down some gang members, the police showed up, and this complicated things for both sides. Now the police were onto me, but they were also onto the Tescas, meaning all hell broke loose, and it's one of the most memorable moments in the game. And this isn't even a rare scenario. This can even be engineered by you, as an upgrade will allow you to call either the police or a gang member to take down an enemy, and if you call them both, then congratulations, you've just started a war. This is one of many ways that Watch Dogs 2 allows you to utilize hacking as a means of impacting the world and its people, and not simply the technology surrounding them. A final note about the world and presentation of Watch Dogs 2, it's that Marcus's weapon is just mesmerizing to watch. It's such a simple yet creative design, and despite the fact that he's definitely splitting some fucking melons with this thing, it is also so damn satisfying to see the way this thing just whips from hand to face. The same is also true for Marcus's movement. His walk is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a hacking teen, and little details like him unplugging and replugging his earbuds in before and after conversations, or the way he reaches for the button on the side of the string when answering or ending a call, makes Marcus feel again like a real human. What doesn't is his exceptional parkour abilities, which sees flips and dives within his movement, and yeah, when running from enemies with guns, there should be no reason that you do a front flip, but hey, if I've illustrated anything here, it's that fun was a top priority, and this extends to the gameplay. Gameplay in Watch Dogs 2 is nothing like the first game. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but at its core, these two games play completely differently, because Watch Dogs 2 discourages any approach that doesn't involve hacking, and that's great. While Watch Dogs 1 was a great game because it provided a John Wick simulator, that was the problem too. The hacking didn't take enough of the spotlight. Here, Marcus has many factors to encourage hacking, such as a widened moveset, harder stealth, and less forgiving combat. Marcus is skilled enough to get by, but he isn't stronger or faster than the enemies in front of him, and rightfully so. If you want to take down the average thug, you'll need to rely on your hacking and outsmart your opponents. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's first look at Marcus and see what tools he has. When I said stealth was encouraged, it's because there aren't advantages to open combat. Using hacks in mid-combat can turn the tides, but most of the enemies don't miss, and they won't passively wait for you to move. Further, you don't have focus. This was the ultimate tool for Aidan, and it allowed him to reliably ignore stealth or hacking. Here, you'll find that a guns blazing approach, while still possible, isn't as fulfilling because the cool factor is gone. Hacking can still offer the advantage you're looking for, like blackouts, jamming earpieces, and using explosives, but when the stealth approach is this fun, I can't see how anyone would choose the loud approach. But hey, that's just me and my preferences. Marcus excels at stealth because he has more to help him, not just in the planning phase, but also in the execution phase, sort of. Instead of limiting the tools available to you, Watch Dogs 2 limits your ability to utilize them with botnets. Now, most useful hacks outside of opening doors and hijacking cameras cost a finite resource. This allows the planning phase to not be an analysis of the environment looking at what can I use, but what should I use. Botnet does refill over time, and certain people will carry some botnet that can be hacked from them, but this still means that there are only so many actions you can do at once. Now I had to think of encounters differently. Who needs a distraction? Who needs to be taken out? But Watch Dogs 2 presents a new question. Do I need to be there? This is something the first game had teased, the idea that a job could be completed remotely. Watch Dogs 2 offers something close to this, depending on what your definition of remote is. Sure, you can complete a mission without Marcus himself physically entering the locations, but you have to do this by using the jumper, which while being smaller and opening the doors, or should I say vents, to new parts of a location, you are virtually doing the same thing, but trading any offensive capabilities for being harder to detect. It's a new way to traverse a stealth encounter, but it isn't quite as remote as I had hoped it would be, and I now realize that makes sense. If we were to genuinely allow for a remote approach, said approach would see you using camera angles and wise hacking to reach an objective, and you'd have to restrict what cameras are where, but this could interfere with those who want a hands-on approach, as the information gathering stage of stealth is unnecessarily prolonged. This balance is exactly why I can't criticize the current setup, because both using the jumper or doing the work yourself is viable, and neither option is marginally better than the other. You could argue that the jumper is better once you have more upgrades, but even then, the lack of defensive capabilities severely hinders it in many ways. I personally preferred physically entering locations because I got to feast my eyes on some of the animation work, and I enjoyed the extra challenge challenge. If we added a truly remote means of completing objectives, we would have to either limit the level design or risk the player doing only that, as it would be the most effective method with the least risk. The reason we can't limit the level design is because it works perfectly as it is now from a hacking standpoint. Sure, there's plenty to say about mission structure, enemy layouts, or the stealth as a whole, which can be needlessly frustrating, but in terms of hacking, the level design allows for a smooth progression both for the experienced and inexperienced players. Something to know when creating a sequel is that you need to factor in the players who are already familiar with the game. In Watch Dogs 2, since I played the first extensively, the basics of hacking, utilizing cameras, and shooting are familiar and thus relatively boring compared to the new mechanics. This meant that, when playing for the first time, because I had the choice between being hands-on, something I was far too familiar with in Watch Dogs 1, or remote, I could choose to approach a mission through an unfamiliar means. But this approach too eventually reaches a point of trivialization. It's at this point that the game reaches a turning point in progression where you stop unlocking new abilities and can achieve greater freedom in how you approach a scenario. At the beginning, cameras will be your number one means of information gathering, but cameras always have blind spots, and that means that even when you've scouted everything you can, there will still be surprises and thus tension, which is great. But once the game ran out of new things, conveniently for me, it was around the time I purchased the quadcopter, and everything opened up. The quadcopter is a remote drone that can be used to survey areas, take down enemies in a very limited fashion, and allows for quality of life, especially when solving puzzles. The reason this opens up the game is because now there are no blind spots. You can see everything. This speeds up the information phase, something that by now begins reeking of tedium, and it allows you to begin conducting plans, orchestrating what devices explode and which enemies are distracted, creating a path for you to pass by, or creating enough chaos for you to take everyone out. This combined with the botnet restrictions, and you can look at all the different ways you can approach something and execute. In some instances, I took the old-fashioned approach, Aidan style, and in others I tried to take a passive approach, aiming to merely slip by in the middle of a blackout. Said blackouts, along with other mass hacks, are now on a cooldown, which is another solid balance change. In the first game, though it took some prep time, blackouts could be used again and again through crafting. Now the tedium of crafting is reduced, and instead of using it over and over again, you can instead mix them with the other abilities on cooldown. Maybe you want to do a blackout to blind the enemies, and once the systems are back online, jam their comms to deafen them. While we're on the subject of a blackout, I appreciated that detection was lower during them. This was supposedly the case in the first game, as many pointed out, but I found it difficult to notice a difference. Here though, it's night and day, at times quite literally. Enemy detection is severely hindered in the dark, but this doesn't mean stealth is a cakewalk. In fact, despite having a wider selection of tools, the stealth in this game can be really difficult, and not always for the best reasons. Opponents patrol at a reasonable pace, investigate sounds, and generally act quite smart, but this game commits a cardinal sin in my eyes, and that is the moment you are detected, everyone surrounding your location will know where you are. At first, I assumed this was a clever way tech is being used against us. Maybe these guards are really quick to hit some kind of panic button on their radio, but this isn't the case because it applies to dogs too. This will occur the near instant you are spotted with a minimal amount of wiggle room, and it applies to when enemies make noise too. This makes stealth insanely unforgiving, and I assume this was an intentional choice because the other Ubisoft games like Assassin's Creed are far easier on you. This is another form of balance, where you're forced to choose your targets carefully, and the way you counteract how quickly they alert the base is by distracting them with a text, allowing you to either sneak up to them or pass by undetected. You can still take down a guard the old-fashioned way, but again, due to botnet, you have a limited number of fake texts to send, and thus a limited number of risk-free takedowns. But even this does not solve yet another issue with detection, and it's a result of the very takedowns you perform. Marcus has a slew of animations that look great as established, but these takedowns are inconsistent. Sometimes he'll bring his opponent to the ground, and in others he'll strangle. Hell, sometimes he just gives them a good slug in the back. The problem is, it's hard to keep track of all these animations, and at times, I'll be in a good spot to take someone down, but pull an unlucky animation, meaning I'm spotted simply because Marcus decided to style on someone. Said enemies have quite minimal variety, but that's okay, because taking them down was not often the goal, and thus getting through them with the available technology was where the challenge lied. Heavy enemies like their appearance in the first game require a melee takedown if it's to be done quietly, and this adds complexity especially if using the jumper, because a simple shock or a small explosion won't be enough to take these guys down. There are multiple factions of enemies, but they never separate themselves much mechanically. The real fun comes from their AI, which is complex enough to almost feel like you are manipulating actual people, which feels great and sounds terrible out of context. I'll never forget the amount of times I intentionally took down an enemy in an area where civilians could see, causing a ruckus but not alerting the rest of the guards to my location, and once a guard goes over to discover the body, most of the others will head over to investigate, and this is a prime opportunity to sneak by them. Or one time where I was deep in a Bloom server room, and as a small army was approaching, I took one out, caused a blackout, and then jammed their comms so I could get away without being seen at all. The stealth fundamentally has the systems in place for situations like this to feel authentic, and again, like you're slinking between people's sightlines, not manipulating AI. When traversing from point to point, you could fast travel, which is appreciated, but don't sleep on the driving, that is still pretty good here. It feels heavy and realistic, but I'd struggle to call it something I engaged with as much as the first game. Thankfully, there are some added features like the nitro that are fun, and the selection of vehicles is still varied. I appreciated that different areas like the first game offer different choices. It's more common to see a 4x4 in areas where the dirt paths are more common, and using the environment to reach locations has the potential to be interesting. In one instance, I had to use a crane to pick myself up, but in what felt like 90% of the other instances, I just looked around for a scissor lift nearby. Keeping with the first game, the puzzles return and in the same interesting ways, though they are far deeper here and thus more enjoyable. Hacking the grid line sees new complexity, and while again there are no head scratchers, and some of the larger hacks result in more redundancies to focus on size as a substitute for difficulty, they take a boring minigame and make it slightly less boring, so consider it improved. Furthermore, these hacks take place in the open world, and thus integrate peering at the puzzles through the camera for an added layer of challenge, further amplifying the puzzle's complexity and further amping the utility of the quadcopter. Marcus's toolkit and the options available to him are yet another way this game is the antithesis to Aidan's story. Marcus is built for his stealth approach and often does not function well in combat, or at least not as well as Aidan, who otherwise thrives in a bullet storm. This dynamic is ironic given how outspoken Marcus is, and how secretive and otherwise stealthy Aidan is when traversing the public. Are both of these toolkits good? Yeah, but it's a drastic shift, and one I'd argue is for the better. While I would commit unspeakable atrocities to get the focus ability back in Watch Dogs 2, the added depth, the stealth, the new hacks, the botnet system, the AI, and those buttery smooth takedowns are a reasonable trade-off. Level design this time around is better and far more memorable than the first game, and the biggest culprit of that is the spectacle. There is a consistent stream of interesting locations, objectives, and mechanics to supplement the poor story excuses for these set pieces. At times you'll be breaking into a penthouse, and at others you'll be remotely driving a car away from the police, or you'll be breaking into a rocket building facility to hack a satellite. Each one of these moments also felt balanced, and I never felt that any of the layouts were unfair or too easy. Granted, there were many restrictions I placed on myself. I didn't like using guns or stun guns that much, but the point remains that the things you do are engaging, whether that's classic stealth through melee or letting out a rabid dog and letting him do the work for you. Watch Dogs 2 finds interesting ways to continue upping the ante, and the late game encounters, and especially some of the online encounters, are a proper challenge, even with all the upgrades. Where level design differs the most is in how you can move the environment for an advantage, not just how you can explode a ridiculous number of junction boxes. One of the goofier strategies I had when I was forced to defend a room against incoming security was to repeatedly close and turn off the remote operated doors leading into the room. The result was slapstick, but when we're already in a game as laid back as Watch Dogs 2, this strategy fits perfectly. You might notice that the things taking place here are not entirely new. I mean, we've seen the stealth or combat approach to missions for years by this point, but it's the way the sandbox actually plays a role in the gameplay that other worlds don't capture quite the same, even to this day. The society that is San Francisco is your tool, and the product of its tech-centered philosophy allows for more freedom in what is virtually a box than any other game I've played. Of course, you might find more to do in an immersive sim, but Watch Dogs 2 doesn't shoot for the same goal. Watch Dogs doesn't want to give you the illusion of freedom, but instead a wide range of things to interact with, so vast that they ditch the theatrics of immersion, I assume as a means of showboating. While the main missions are a near constant stream of entertainment, I expected the side content to feel subpar, and in many ways that's not true. Sure, it never reaches the same scale as the later story operations, and they can be short, but I never found myself getting bored either. And some of the reveals here are insane, like when you run into Aidan Pearce again. Given the tone of this game, I half expected Aidan to crack one-liners and say poggers upon being rescued, but the game instead treated him with respect. And it showed to me that despite Ubisoft aiming to take the tone of this game in a separate direction, they weren't going to discount the previous game's world in the process. Where the side missions excel is in showcasing the smaller work the team does. Our main operations surround taking down Bloom, and while the crew all come from different backgrounds, their hacktivist goals remain the same. The fundamental cause DedSec fights for is bringing justice to the shitty people in the world, and that includes pharmacists, corrupt cops, and teaching lessons to young people unaware of the revolution in front of them. The justifications for some of these missions might not be the best. Someone just asked Marcus to drive a bunch of go-kart races, and he asked no questions about it. And one instance left me scratching my head when Satara, in an attempt to teach her cousin a lesson about online security, hacks her light switch's music and breaches her privacy. There are certainly better ways to go about teaching this lesson, but it doesn't satisfy the player's prying eyes. We like being in control, and we like messing with people, which is exactly why there are so many ATM hacks. There's no gameplay here. You just watch somebody react to either being given a ton of cash or losing it in an instant. You get to play God, and I enjoyed seeing how they would handle themselves and then acting accordingly based on whether or not I thought they were an asshole. It's a shallow moment, but if these NPCs weren't so human, I wouldn't have happily played God as much as I did. This mission does introduce a few moral questions, because you could hypothetically destroy people's lives, and Marcus just keeps expressing how fun it is, but that kind of internal contradiction is one we'll tackle when we cover the main story. Point is, outside of the massive attacks and plot lines, the small-time gigs land surprisingly well, and I think it's because of the superhero parallel that many have drawn from this series. Many have stated that Aidan uses his hacking like a superpower, and this applies to Marcus too. When we play as a character that wants to help people, it becomes so much more believable when they're not just stopping the big bad guys at the top, but taking down the small-time crooks too. It resonates in a similar way to Spider-Man games that have you helping someone find their cat. And I understand the stark differences in that comparison, but the sentiment remains. Unlike the first game, there is no reputation meter, and that could either be a result of it being underdeveloped or misinterpreted in the first game. I fell victim to this too, as I referred to it as a morality meter, which just isn't true, but nonetheless, morals are thrown out the window here. And this dissonance between Marcus's morals and the destruction he causes ends up being a major point of criticism, which I plan to tackle later. For now, I want to mention another aspect of the world, which is multiplayer. Few sacrifices have been made here. The invasions are still here, but they lose some focus in exchange for the co-op missions. These are designed to be completed with 2 or 3 friends, but they function as solo side missions exceptionally well. And while in terms of replayability they won't beat the option to replay the main story and those side missions, I always found myself coming back to them, and they were where I started when I came back to the game from a long hiatus. It's in these missions I realized how well most of the missions here are designed around the mechanics of the game. When I first came back to these this year, it was after not playing Watch Dogs 2 for years, and I found them really challenging, but once I replayed the campaign and knew what to analyze before heading into an objective, they became much more manageable. This is, in essence, what these achieve, a playground to flex your skills. It also highlights the strength of Watch Dogs 2's gameplay, because despite having no story, slim excuses, and with each mission being little more than an outpost or two, they remain engaging. Even if the side content on display here didn't hit the mark on all occasions, what is here is a solid mix of small-time shenanigans and large-scale operations. I certainly felt that the side quests did less to set up or even further the world that was presented in the first game, but I can imagine that's a tough act to follow, especially when we're swapping out grey hat hackers for red-nosed clowns. This extends to the story as well, where the most we hear of interesting topics like Bellwether, Aidan, Chicago, or really anything else is a passing mention or a conversation that speaks about it in a manner that kills any intrigue. Something the side quests also illustrate, and the DLC proves this too, is that Watch Dogs 2 is at its best when it forgoes the grander narrative. Watch Dogs 2 presents a simple story. Marcus Holloway, an experienced hacker, wants to take his skills to the next level and sees that DedSec is the way to do that. The main cast is Wrench, the group's hardware expert, Satara, the branding and social media expert, Josh, the software expert, and Horatio. You may notice I didn't give Horatio an associated skill, and that's because he doesn't have one. The most development we get from Horatio in the first act of the game is that he was previously a DJ, and that he and Marcus initially hit it off well. If this was expanded upon in any way, we'd be in business, but instead, we learn nothing more until one mission before he dies. I promise, that wasn't a spoiler, because Horatio is never much help in the story. He's not in any of the side content, most of which is filled to the brim with dialogue, and even when he does get screen time, it's not enough to make us care about him. I'll admit, the mission within Noodle is fun, and the running gag of Horatio having to swap to corporate mode is relatable, but when he dies, I didn't care, and this is a shared sentiment among many who played the game. As Marcus gets close with the crew, he forges a plan to take down Bloom once and for all. Lofty ambitions for a crew of 5, but through smaller operations that aim to expose just how many cookie jars Bloom has her hands in, those goals become more and more achievable. You'll be quickly escalating from corrupt politicians to hacking entire satellite networks, all while tangled in a web of side plots. These B-plots don't necessarily take away from the main goal, but they certainly muddy the waters. Multiple missions are spent getting revenge for Horatio's death, multiple missions are spent in a hacker war, and while the cause of these events are linked to Bloom, I never felt as though I was progressing the fight in any meaningful way. Rather, I was clearing the roadblock, allowing myself to get back on track. The main antagonist is Bloom, but the figurehead is Dushan, who continues to taunt and fight back against DedSec, at one point stifling their ambition. I think Dushan, despite having little to no depth, works well as a trophy villain for us to hate. He's condescending, intelligent, and is even wise enough to try and nip DedSec in the bud, but he lacks presence outside of the few cutscenes we see of him, and even fewer are the interactions with the crew, making this a forgettable villain that reeks of untapped potential. He's a great foil to DedSec, the antithesis. DedSec is a bunch of punks, so having Dushan act as a man-bun wearing Starbucks drinking normie has room for comedy, but it's never seized. Instead, Dushan acts to put roadblocks in the crew's way, his biggest attempt arguably being at the beginning, where he seemingly causes the crew to stop their fight against Bloom for a time. Said ambition is quickly rejuvenated by the recruitment of Raymond Kenny, aka T-Bone, who helps him get back in the fight. I mentioned this when talking about the return of Aidan for a brief time, but I appreciate that T-Bone meshes well with this game's world, and while he may not mesh that well with the others in the group, he doesn't feel altered in any ways to better fit the narrative. This is aside from one moment where he, understandably, protests a plan to cause a mass blackout, but his resistance is dampered oddly fast for someone as stubborn as him. I also felt that his inclusion at the end was slightly out of place. The entire crew had a part in taking down Dushan, and while Ray contributed plenty, and maybe it's important to have him there for the sake of completing his redemption that was started in Bad Blood, it still felt odd for the final encounter to include only Marcus and T-Bone. I would have appreciated seeing his guilt from Bad Blood resurface more than in a few dialogue lines, but I can understand how that may be at odds with the overall tone. After recruiting Ray, the crew investigates Blue's involvement with gang operations, and Horatio is killed. Horatio's greatest tragedy is that he was born to die. His character served no other purpose, and that sucks, because it makes him utterly wasted, and even his death is wasted. Could Can you imagine how much more impactful Horatio's death would have been if it was someone like Sitara or Wrench? I'm not saying we should kill these characters off, of course not, I like them. But it creates a divide between the player and the game when we forget Horatio's around for most of the game, and yet Marcus is as angry as if his own son was killed. What further doesn't help is Horatio's design. The guy just looks generic, and I wouldn't be surprised if he really was created for the sole purpose of being killed later. Like the writers initially planned for a different character to die, but realized they liked all the other characters too much, and decided to create a new one to take the bullet. It would also explain why he's barely in any promotional art, but to be fair, Josh isn't in a ton of them either. Anywho, eventually the gang makes a final push against Bloom, getting into their main servers and gathering enough evidence to put Dushan away for good. The third act of the game is exceptionally well done when it comes to progress. In the beginning hours, your operations feel disconnected from the main goal because they really are. You aren't taking down Bloom, you're building an army. So by the time the final act rolls around and we're completing operations with the explicit goal of getting dirt on Bloom, it allows each mission to feel impactful. Furthermore, the difficulty ramps up a considerable degree, which makes the missions feel all the more climactic. And the high-octane set pieces that accompany them, like breaking into and out of a penthouse suite and piloting a spider bot just like in Aidan's digital trips, was great. Unfortunately, when the game ends, not all is well. Like the first game, Watch Dogs 2 ends on a somber note, with the player knowing that despite the success of the protagonists, their efforts were in vain. Granted, this was an issue not with Watch Dogs 2, but with Legion, the mere existence of which confirms that Marcus and friends never could stop the inevitable. This is an unavoidable problem for the game. If they go the route of Watch Dogs 1, where the story is ironically human, hacking and technology can feel as though it's taking a back seat. But if they take the route of this game, then they have an ending that feels undermined by the existence of a sequel, which will naturally aim to raise the stakes. What puts salt on this game's wound is that there are many points where it feels as though our efforts are pointless. The entire first act sees us not making a dent into Bloom's operation, and while Marcus eventually takes a leadership role by the end, replacing Sitara as DedSec's figurehead, it doesn't feel like it's earned, because the characters are essentially doing the same thing they've been doing since the beginning, but now they've gone through trauma. I think a lot of this boils down to the characters, and I know I'm contradicting myself here because I do love these characters, but none of them have meaningful arcs. Outside of the team's morale, no individual changes in any way from the beginning of the game. Ubisoft struck gold with a cast that is effortlessly able to fill audio gaps with charismatic dialogue and cutscenes that I never skip on repeat playthroughs because their interactions are so enjoyable, capable of creating something from nothing, and yet they are content with only providing excuses for us to see these characters do nothing. This is seen most notably through my favorite character, Wrench. Wrench is my favorite character because he's just a goofy little guy, and while he might be a little too over the top, I promise we'll talk about the cringy writing later, I love how unique the character is. During the later half of the game, Wrench is captured, and despite being released, his mask is seized. Marcus immediately knows that this mask is part of who Wrench is. Hell, the game does a great job of making Wrench look uncanny without the mask, and we also get to see that the mask is meant to hide something. Without it, he's scared, his voice quiet, his personality gone. The game has the choice to dive into this. What is Wrench hiding from us? If we unpack these things, we can sympathize more with the character. If we understand why the man under the mask is so timid, we can better appreciate why the mask is so over the top. Unfortunately, we don't get that. It's touching to see Marcus be a good friend, but that's all we see, when we could have seen even more. Once the mask is back on, it's like it was never taken off. Sitara is shown to have a past in freerunning and a passion for tagging spots around town, but this never leads to any growth, no depth. We don't learn anything. I assume with every spot tagged, she would call us and tell a story about that location and her previous exploits, but instead we continue to impress her over and over, and that's about what Marcus does throughout the game. Marcus is simply perfect. He's caring, hard done by, skilled enough to keep up with Raymond fucking Kenny, and consistently impresses everyone around him. This makes him relatively boring. I can't project myself onto a character that's flawless because I'm not flawless, and if that is the goal, then why give the character personality within the dialogue? Why not allow us to create our own character and have Marcus replace Horatio? Sure, the crew's outsmarted every now and then, but they quickly bounce back, leaving us feeling as though they haven't learned from their mistakes, or made really any mistakes at all. This is my biggest gripe with the story. We have these characters that have interesting foundations, and yet nothing is built atop them. Now, that might be my biggest gripe, but if I were a betting man, I'd bet it's not yours. The story of Watch Dogs 2, specifically the writing, has been and will continue to be the biggest point of contention from its critics. Claims that the story is poorly written, or that the dialogue is cringy will be at the front lines of any argument, but before we delve into that, I need to try and analyze what cringe is, because in the last decade it has been misused so much that it has taken on a new meaning that we have to consider. Cringe is officially defined as a type of secondhand embarrassment, and more semantically, it results in a strange gut or chest feeling. Cringe, on the internet, however, is a reductive means of describing anything you don't like. You don't have to explain what it is that bothers you about something anymore, now you can just call it cringe. Cringe is a substitute for nuanced critique, and proof of this is in any interrogation. Next time someone says something is cringe, ask them, Why is it cringe? In my experience, many don't have an answer. Now, this is not to say that the people who don't like the writing in Watch Dogs 2 and those that call it cringe are wrong, but it's to say that we need to identify what about the writing rubbed people the wrong way, because what's cringe for me might not be cringe for you. And this also is not to say that the writing in the game is good. Instead, I want to take a deeper look at the strengths and weaknesses here. So with that said, let's look at the writing. Watch Dogs 2 does not necessarily attempt to be hip or cool, but to be natural and fun. And when you're having this much dialogue all the time, you're bound to fuck it up a bit. I believe that everyone who has played this game through likely has 2 lines that stuck with them after playing the game. One that was funny enough to stick with them, and another that made them say, Marcus, why the fuck would you say that? In my case, this was the bad one.
Got the game on lock like we changed the key. What? Danny Brown. Man, fuck all y'all.
You know, I'm a nerd, and I like Danny Brown, but you will never catch me saying that shit. Ever. While on the flip side, this was the line I enjoyed a lot.
Stingrays would be cool.
Oh, no, fuck that, dude. Those fuckers killed the crocodile hunter. You can't trust them. Veto.
How's it coming along, guys?
So far, we vetoed stingrays and orcas, but dolphins are still on the table.
Oh, no, they're not. Ugh.
Good call on the stingrays. Those killed the crocodile hunter.
Yo, I'm so confused right now. What are we talking about?
I've had conversations like this before, and they weren't cringy. This is the peak of casual conversations, and there's a lot of dialogue like this. Granted, the issue there is that a lot of it is pointless. We're just talking for the sake of talking, but that is realistic. I've had countless pointless conversations just like that with my friends, and while stingrays have never specifically come up in conversation, any comparable pointless topic certainly has. I too, just like the characters here, say cringy things. And the argument isn't that the use of hacker lingo and cheap jokes aren't cringy, they are, but it's that it's accurate. I'll expose myself a bit here. I commonly use internet lingo in my day-to-day speech with friends. I will casually say poggers, or W, or L, and I will frequently quote whatever meme is circulating for that month, and I'm not gonna name any names, but I know for a fact that your favorite YouTubers do it too. Is it cringe? Maybe. But what matters is, it happens. Now, just because it happens doesn't make it not cringe. I get that. But what it does make it is real. If I want realistic dialogue, I want it to have those moments of silence. I want it to have the occasional joke that doesn't land. I want the mundane awkwardness where all the parties are scrambling to find the next thing to say. I want someone to miss part of the conversation because they were distracted. That's what Watch Dogs 2 does, and that's why I love the writing. I've yet to see a more realistic approach to nerd dialogue than this. But here's the thing with writing like this. It needs to come from a place of authenticity, and when we pair the characters' words with their actions, their words feel disingenuous. Another major gripe with the game people have is with our favorite misused and misunderstood gaming term, ludonarrative dissonance. Semantically, ludonarrative dissonance is when a game's narrative themes are at odds with its gameplay. In Watch Dogs, we see DedSec as a group of good people. They're trying to bring power back to the people. They want to take down the bad guys. They're the heroes, but their actions speak otherwise. The guards you take down, are they part of a system that wants to harm you, or are they just doing their jobs? You may argue that there is the choice to be a pacifist, and that is true. Theoretically, you could complete the game without lethality, but why does the game then give you countless ways to kill? Most of the weapons you can 3D print fire real bullets. Marcus is a registered gun owner, and if the game didn't want you to use them, why does Wrench in the final mission show up equipped with a grenade launcher? Surely he doesn't plan on letting anyone out alive. You could argue that what happens in gameplay stays in gameplay, and I am more than happy to follow that, but it still doesn't solve the issue. Again, when Marcus and friends caused a mass blackout, despite no one dying, they took that risk without as much as a second thought, and may I remind you, they were warned about that risk. They risked the public by driving a car at dangerous speeds throughout the city, and Marcus's cannon tool is a fucking pool ball. And I don't care what you say, it may not be lethal, but the head trauma alone will ruin someone's life. There's no doubt some disconnect here, and while you can do every mission without killing, I can understand the sentiment that presenting the option is enough to break your immersion. Fortunately for myself, I always go for a non-lethal approach because I find it more challenging and rewarding. Something I want to note but not necessarily criticize here is the way DedSec is portrayed in Watch Dogs 2. In the first game, they are seen as a shadowy organization significantly more powerful than Aidan and so coveted that you need to pass multiple trials to get in. While the digital vigilantes make a return, the tone is completely different. Now instead of a tight-knit super squad, they're just a bunch of nerds, and the recruitment process seems pretty easy, especially when DedSec contacts are all over San Francisco. I think a big reason for my disdain towards the new tone, at least in relation to the first game, is branding. DedSec in Watch Dogs 1 wasn't always at center stage, and when they were, they had no aesthetic, no propaganda, no social media manager, and that made them interesting. Their interest was not in appealing to the people as a brand, but in providing justice and being Watch Dogs. Now, you could argue that the DedSec group in Chicago could be different given the heavy criminal roots in the area, and since San Francisco is a much happier place tonally, and given that public support of DedSec plays a larger role, it makes sense that this DedSec group would function differently. But what's interesting is that the problems they face are the same. Watch Dogs posed a lot of questions upon release. With this new era of technology, with Big Brother always watching, what does crime, politics, daily life, and justice look like? It doesn't quite answer those, but Watch Dogs 2 aims to remedy that. What are the political ethical implications of constant surveillance and artificial intelligence capable of convicting you of a crime you have yet to commit. The first game took no stance on it. Fair. Watch Dogs 2, however, aims to explicitly state those implications and use them as a means of commentary. That's right, guys, we're getting political. Brace for impact. Now, I know politics can be a sore subject, so as always, when I tackle these issues, I'm not going to comment on my own thoughts on what the game is saying about the real world, and rather look at how it plays into the game world, and if the ideas they are presenting are interesting enough within the context of the game. I know my political beliefs, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to confidently broadcast them to the world. In fact, I shit you not, I don't know what day of the week it is as I write this. My brain is in constant cruise control. And so with that said, Marcus's main motivation for wanting to stick it to Bloom outside of the ethical concerns with a system like CTOS is that he's flagged as a high-risk individual despite having no prior criminal record. Now this could be because he is a registered firearms owner, unemployed, or more likely because he hails from Oakland, a territory that the CTOS is deemed to be a shoot-on-site high-risk location for the San Francisco police. These specific areas, not just Oakland, coincide with the low-income areas, the people being priced out of San Francisco, and this is exactly the kind of dystopian ideas I like seeing. Insurance companies can deny you before you even walk through the door because of an algorithm, and those who are in the lower class are further held there because so many of their opportunities are determined by where they come from. When what we code into our machines is a reflection of our society, whether we like it or not, the ugly side of our society will bleed through. When your face is on every camera and those feeds are used to identify people who might be suspects in a crime, mistakes will inevitably occur. Now let's suppose an innocent person steps in front of a camera and happens to be of a darker skin tone. Facial recognition software, while it is improving every day, still struggles with accurately recognizing darker skin tones, and this applies especially so to women. Furthermore, what if this hypothetical person is from a low-income and thus high-risk neighborhood? Mrs. Innocent is now a high threat and a suspect for a crime and has no one to defend her. These are the problems the game subtly presents, though without much of an answer. A rebuttal to this issue is that with CTOS cameras being everywhere and with a digital footprint being unavoidable, in court this woman should be able to prove exactly where she was and when to a T. But let's look at a more overt example. When finding data on a new self-driving car, we see that the car, if danger is imminent, would choose whose safety to prioritize based on their life score. Something dictated by their income, race, gender, employment, education. Again, your life is in the hands of corporations that act as a biased judge, jury, and executioner. I wouldn't mind if Watch Dogs didn't fully flesh out this idea, but the problem I take with it is that they don't offer a solution, or much in the way of nuance. Watch Dogs 2 is comfortable painting a picture of a dystopia and outlining the intricate ways it can be used to create systemic injustice, and yet the product itself is not a cautionary tale. As the player, we love this world because we get to feel powerful in gameplay, and yet if this world were to become real, we would be nothing but powerless. The only solution provided by Watch Dogs is to burn everything to the ground, but I don't really agree with that. Taking down Bloom only gets you so far. No matter what, the most you could do is delay the inevitable. I understand I'm missing the point. A game where Marcus and friends infiltrate Bloom and ensure that the problems outlined in the game are solved in the most productive manner wouldn't make for a great game, but I wouldn't mind if the game backed up its mission objective in regards to extreme surveillance. The burn it to the ground story might be comparable to real life, and the game is saying that in order to get justice, you need to take it by any means, and while I struggle to agree with it, I can't necessarily say that approach is wrong. Revolutions don't often happen peacefully, and if there's one thing the team accomplishes by the end of the game, it's inspiring others to resist too. If not by the end credits clearly stating it, then by the gameplay mechanic of Watch Dogs Legion, which allows anyone to join the cause, and most are exceptionally willing. Eventually, the people will say enough is enough, and when DedSec can act as a voice for those without one, they don't necessarily have to beat the rise of technology to win. Maybe they just need to even the odds. Maybe that is their messaging, that in order to enact change, we need to mobilize the population. But then I ask again, mobilize and empower them to do what? Who the fuck knows? I'm looking way too deep into this. The point is that once again, Watch Dogs presents interesting ideas, but doesn't really do much with them. Overall, the story of Watch Dogs 2 is not great, and I can't disagree with people who think it's poorly written, but I also think it has one of the most unique casts in any game I've played. Every character, except Horatio, plays off each other so well that I'd be curious to see if this was all written, or if some of it was improvised. It feels that natural. Individual moments in the story work well. We have fun with the gang, watch sitcom-level cutscenes, get into hijinks, but the moment you zoom out, I can't help but wonder what this is all for. When it comes to the stories and mission structure of Watch Dogs 2, the game is at its best when simply helping people, which is exactly what the additional content under the Humane Conditions and No Compromise pack offers. Simply put, these handful of extra side missions is Watch Dogs 2 at its absolute finest. There are 4 operations available, and I won't bother going into detail on the story for any of these because they are all relatively surface level and follow the same pattern of some big corporation exploiting the people of San Francisco and the gang has to put a stop to it, but along the way we get some interesting new mechanics, characters, tools, and more to keep things fresh. And what this DLC proves more than anything else is that Ubisoft caught that lightning in a bottle, and these missions are Ubisoft churning out high quality content like clockwork. The writing here, love it or hate it, feels just like the main game. The game gameplay is elevated, and most of the things I was annoyed with in the base game, notably the lack of a strong story, are toned down here. On the gameplay front, we have some new weapons to help us non-lethally take down our enemies. The paintball gun is here, and I couldn't really find a use for it. Apparently it used to be quite good, but has since been nerfed into the ground, which includes single player. That's okay though, because it leaves more room for the air shotgun, which is the most hilarious weapon in the game. I mentioned during the main missions I preferred stealth to combat, but with the way this Goliath launches people through the air, I couldn't wait to get into my next gunfight. The best part is, if it's lined up properly, it can affect more than one person. I can't lie, there's no logical reason for loving this thing, it is just funny. Fortunately, there will be some new enemies for you to use this weapon on, as we now have enemies with jammers that can not only detect when you get too close to them, but prevent you from executing any hacks within their vicinity. This changes our goals with stealth. In many instances, the most effective means of getting past a guard is to permanently remove them through some kind of takedown. They won't get in your way now, and if you have to leave the same way you came in, you won't have to sneak past them all over again. With the jammer enemies, this is flipped around, where the most effective tactic is to manipulate where they move using your tools. While you can still take them down the old-fashioned way, there's the lengthy prerequisite of decoding the jamming signal, turning the jammer off temporarily, and then hoping they're in a vulnerable spot. Couple these improvements with the new locales you stealth through, a yacht, a factory, and a mansion, and we have gameplay that feels like it fits right in, offering something new but not reinventing the wheel. The same could be applied to the cutscenes here, which again exude this hilarious authenticity that makes me fall right back in love with these characters.
As much as I enjoy our banter and underlying sexual tension,
I'm hurt. I thought we moved on to overt sexual tension.
Marcus, there's something I want to show you. On my laptop, dude. Oh, were you...
Don't fuck with the hot sauce.
Woo! Yo, that's like a line from a Cisco movie. Damn, that's my boy.
The exception to this is a character I was excited to see again, Jordy. My expectations were high because T-Bone integrated into this game surprisingly well, and yet Jordy, not so much. I like his delivery, I like his personality, but there's a subtle humor in how much he loves his job and himself that's missing here. I also didn't appreciate the one moment you work with him because he ends up killing me more than he did the enemy.
This might be loud.
While we're on the topic of characters I didn't appreciate, the entire operation with Lenny was just odd. She acts so strangely to Josh and not in any humorous way, and said behavior isn't explained. I know she's an antagonist, so we aren't necessarily meant to like her, but at least make a character like this one I enjoy hating. Aside from those minor issues, I love the DLC here, and further, I appreciated the new slew of multiplayer challenges provided here, which ramp up the difficulty in some considerable ways. I need to also address I haven't talked about the multiplayer much, and what is here is great, but in my attempts to get footage for this video, the multiplayer has refused to function due to easy anti-cheat not being installed. The catch is, it most definitely is installed. I've gone down numerous troubleshooting threads trying to solve this issue, but I just cannot for the life of me figure it out. The reason I'm choosing to just not talk about it is because the multiplayer is a cherry on top of a product I already enjoy, with its inclusion or exclusion not affecting my opinion of it. So here's where I'm conflicted on Watch Dogs 2. I totally understand the criticisms against the game, and in some ways I agree with them, and yet I still find myself coming back to it time and time again. Also, I think the game's disdain from fans of the first game is warranted given just how different it is. Its tone was the opposite of the first game, its gameplay the same, and its story, while still succeeding in providing interesting characters, did less in my eyes to build off the excellent foundation the first game set. It almost felt like Ubisoft was scared to return to the first game because of how poorly it launched. Keep in mind, Watch Dogs released in the same year as Assassin's Creed Unity, and both Watch Dogs 2 and Assassin's Creed Syndicate took a far more laid-back approach, as if to emphasize that Ubisoft twice now has bit off more than they could technically chew, and they've learned their lesson. Fortunately, Watch Dogs 2, in spite of it all, is a fun game. Does that mean good? Well, not in the same sense that the first game was good, but yeah, it's good. I'd be lying if I said part of this praise isn't much easier given the state of Watch Dogs Legion. I've loved Watch Dogs 2 from the start, but seeing the games it's sandwiched between, I know why I love it, and why I feel guilt. Because this game caused irreparable damage to the series. Watch Dogs now has two very different games with two very different fan bases. Now the issue is, which one do you satisfy? Legion was an opportunity to cement aside as a one-off, solidifying the series as either serious action-based or cheesy hacking-based. And what did they do? Well, yeah, fuck me. What did they do? Watch Dogs Legion is a game that is, at its core, and I rarely say this, fundamentally flawed. The idea to play as anyone can only result in a game where you play as no one. Sure, There are some ways to still deliver an engaging story, but I think with this concept and given what the first two games established, Watch Dogs Legion was starting on the back foot and would need to deliver something truly amazing to rise above the inevitable backlash. But before we can look at the game itself, I want to talk about what the first two games established, as it's critical context for the reception and conception of Watch Dogs Legion. The first thing to note is the tone difference between Watch Dogs 1 and 2. I discussed this shift in tone a lot in my Watch Dogs 2 video. A lot of you didn't see it though, as evidenced by the people who thought the video was rage bait, because everyone knows the most efficient way to pump out rage bait is to spend nearly 100 hours writing a critique of a game, and given my track record, it's clear I never talk about the things I like. With that in mind, hey! Pay the fuck attention! If you've seen it, then you'll know that I argued that the tone shift in Watch Dogs 2, as well as the gameplay being so radically different compared to the first, despite it being good, led to the series being split in two fan bases, meaning Ubisoft had the choice to please one side or to try and please both, with the risk of pleasing neither. Watch Dogs Legion is their choice, and I'm sure you can imagine who was pleased here. Let's start where it's easiest. Playing as anybody. Is that what people want? And is that such a radical shift from the previous games? Watch Dogs starred a character that was by all means a blank slate, but not for the character to project themselves onto. Instead, it served as part of Aidan's character. His face is always obscured, his clothing is ordinary, and even his position in our view of the game keeps him comfortably in the peripheral. He needs to blend in because his work demands it. Operating alongside Aidan is DedSec, a group of anonymous hackers that intend on being Chicago's watchdogs. As the game progresses, we learn that there are other DedSec groups all over the world, mostly fighting for the same goal. Characters we encounter have ties to DedSec, their leader is unknown, and generally, the theme is clear. It could be anyone, and that's the power Aidan thrives on. Hacking is an invisible superpower, meaning anyone from a grease monkey bum to a crime warlord can utilize it, and so can Aidan. The second game decided to make Marcus and the rest of the core San Francisco group more expressive. Marcus is even positioned in the middle of the screen, but his and his friends' unique quirks strengthen the theme of the first game. It could be anyone. Sure, those characters can at times be too bombastic, turning the serious tone of DedSec from the first game into a Saturday cartoon, but these people still put on a serious face for DedSec when approaching the public. So fast forward to this new game, and realistically, it could be anyone. The protagonist could be an old woman, a janitor, a fashion influencer. As long as they have a reason to resist, they fit the bill. Legion does this well. Every character you recruit has an event that radicalizes them and justifies their willingness to risk their safety for DedSec. But I think we've missed the other half of the equation. Our two previous protagonists were nobodies. But they weren't no one. To the wider world, they were another face in the crowd, unimportant. But to the people that knew them, to the player, they were people. Playing as literally anyone on paper fulfills the first half of this fantasy. Our protagonist, like any member of DedSec, could be anyone. But once we choose them as part of the team, what do we get? Unfortunately, the same thing. We can't expect Ubisoft to create a unique, in-depth background for every character, and truthfully, their solution is likely the best it could have been. But if the best you could possibly do deprives the player of a proper protagonist, then perhaps the idea itself is flawed. Let's take a look at the average protagonist in Watch Dogs Legion. They have a voice, hobbies, maybe an addiction, a tone, a loadout, and some clothing. The problem is, this is true of the NPCs as well. Once an NPC crosses that line and becomes what is effectively the protagonist, nothing changes. Their backstory is unexplored, their story non-existent, and their tools are all that makes them enticing. But maybe we're interpreting this wrong. What if instead of our player avatar being the person, it's the people? We control the London DedSec faction, and it's only by proxy that we actually control the actions of its individuals. Through that lens, the game becomes more enticing. I collect people like cards in a deck, and the fun comes from achieving DedSec's goals through orchestrating different people, different skill sets, to get the job done. Well, then there's a new issue in the sense that almost every mission is completed by every person. Even worse, when we start looking at these people as not who they are, but what they provide, we dehumanize them, in some ways making them less valuable than a random NPC, and in an instant, we've contradicted the life that Ubisoft always breathes into their worlds. I have a shocking number of British friends, I know, shitty, and whenever I talk to them about Legion, they say a part of them really loves this game because it's set in London, and said city is done so well. And you know what? They're right. For as much as we can criticize the game and even how its mechanics interact with the city, that city is really well made and feels almost as lively as Chicago and San Francisco. I really hate to harp on it, but the strength of this world is hampered hard by glitches that, while not game ruining most of the time, are incredibly immersion breaking. When exploring the city, cars will pop in and out, people will fly across the screen, and in one instance, I was spotted because as I approached an enemy, one showed up out of thin air. The reason Ubisoft's worlds are always so fun is that they are so expertly deliberately detailed that I can't help but be immersed in it. And when it comes to Watch Dogs, that is twofold because of the NPCs. But when those NPCs are actively moving across my screen, teleporting around, then they remain NPCs, never becoming people. But that is just the 1%. So let's stay focused on the other 99, because more often than not, London is just as good as San Francisco, and this time has a new twist: surveillance. The game is the dystopian future that the first and second game warned about. Cameras are absolutely everywhere, no one's data is safe, and it gives the world an oppressive feel, selling the idea that a normal person would realistically want to fight back. Checkpoints around the city need to be avoided unless you want to start a chase. Albion guards, if taking a longer look at you, will become suspicious, and sometimes they'll just beat you up. Which you sort of need to let them do, because it's either get arrested by them or engage in a chase that potentially ends your character's life. But Albion isn't the only clan this time around, as Clan Kelly has a monopoly on crime in London. It's a shame that there aren't more factions like there was in San Francisco, but I have to admit the interactions between the two factions still made for entertaining gameplay, even when it hurts sometimes. In one instance, I was infiltrating a base in the open world with a spider bot, but my character was caught in the crossfire between an Albion and Clan Kelly shooting. It almost got me killed, but I was able to sneak into the base on foot while the occupants of said base were coming out to back up their people. Dynamic moments like this were what made London feel alive and reinforced the best feeling of the Watch Dogs series, that you are not special. The world operates independent of the player, leading to many instances where I ran into my fellow DedSec members in the wild, saw an accident on the road, saw someone getting harassed by Albion. The first time I saw it, I intervened, nearly costing my life in the ensuing chase. So when it happened again, I weighed my options and chose to keep walking. I think a perfect testament to London's quality is that as I walked by, seeing the person get arrested for no reason, I felt bad. I felt compelled to help these collages of polygons. Not many games can make me do that. I once again had fun simply people watching. Looking at two people and seeing what they're up to, learning about their backstory, seeing their dirty little secrets. In some cases, they even got annoyed at my incessant staring and shooed me away. If I came across an elite enemy, instead of taking them down, which would make them hate DedSec, I decided instead to go around them, look into them, and bring them onto my team. It's an addictive power, like catching an opposing trainer's Pokemon. So not only can I live in this world, but I can make an impact on people's lives. Now, when that Clan Kelly member enters a restricted area, they try to blend in, and part of their story is how they're a double agent working both for Clan Kelly and DedSec. This was one of the few moments where the game clicked. Watch Dogs Legion is a game that can be quite mediocre at times, and I'd say a lot of it is painfully average, but you'll go through these brief 30-minute windows where the game is living up to its potential, where the different mechanics all fit together just right, and it'll make you understand the potential this game has. It's sad, because when those pieces aren't working together, you know it's possible, barely within reach. Most of the characters I played were just random people. In one case, I rescued a construction worker's sister, and thus they fought for DedSec. It's a pretty simple concept, and I considered it quite boring. But then, this member was kidnapped by Albion, and now I had to break her out. I did so by using a different character who had a trait that caused them to, at any random moment, collapse and die. After recruiting them, I created my own backstory in my head, that this person has a terminal illness, but the doctors won't treat them because CTOS doesn't deem their life valuable enough. So their plan instead is to spend their last days going balls to the wall to take down Albion and CTOS. This headcanon justifies the more aggressive, hands-on approach I took with this character, and it was so much fun. I wish this was the majority of the game, but due to these moments being contained in side content where the story is generally controlled and created by you, that's not the case. The main missions of Watch Dogs Legion have a tough challenge ahead of them. How do we get players to connect with a protagonist that isn't set? One that isn't guaranteed. This is something the developers noted as a potential challenge. In fact, the developers noted a lot of what I mentioned as potential challenges. NPC depth, differing skill sets, tonal inconsistencies, speech inconsistencies, and it begs the potentially rude question: why? Why play as anyone when there are this many challenges, especially when said challenges don't have a clear solution? It seemed like so much needed to be sacrificed in order to uphold the idea that in the end wasn't worth the hassle. I wonder why Ubisoft didn't just let us make our own character, and instead of having different characters with different accents and deliveries, just allow us to choose those in a character creator, and then offer dialogue choices within the game so we can choose to be more outgoing like Marcus, or play as an Aidan-esque dark and mysterious type. These ideas are already in the game. When you recruit an NPC, you can change nearly everything about them. Hair, piercings, clothing, all of it. Creating your own character would continue the theme of these games, with the protagonist being literally anyone, but without risking them being no one. A character I used plenty in the early game was Baravi Bajwa. She was a construction worker, meaning she had access to certain restricted areas and, more importantly, had access to a cargo drone, perfect for achieving some elevation, but otherwise, That's it. And because she never directly showed more than a jovial optimism for DedSec, and never got more credit than the group as a whole did despite doing so much, she just felt ignored. Now, I will admit that eventually my goal was to use as much of my team in this playthrough as possible, so I never stuck with anyone for too long, but on a different playthrough, I used the same character for every mission, even customized them to my liking, and still, they just felt like an NPC. Ironically, there was only one time where the interaction between myself and the NPC felt organic, and it was when there were no cutscenes. As I was walking around committing my usual acts of hacktivism, I stumbled across a woman who was handcuffed. I untied them and went on my way, only to be contacted by them and told that because of my kind act, they wanted to help. And boom, I had a new operative. This was another moment where the game's stars aligned. I was having fun, but then it dawned on me exactly why I enjoyed this interaction over the others. And it was because it felt more organic than the usual recruitment cutscenes. There is something so fucking ironic that a game with a central theme of organic life being at odds with emotionless technology needs to rely on a shoddy AI procedurally generated population to half-heartedly achieve its goals. So we've talked about how there's a stupid number of people in this game, all with a stupid number of voices. Surely Ubisoft couldn't afford to hire voice actors for all of them, so their solution was to instead use voice modulation. I think there's a whole video-sized rabbit hole about this, but according to what I could find online, they paid a handful of voice actors and used AI tools to change their tone, pitch, even accent a little, to create the wide collage of voices we find in the game. I'll admit, the selection of voices, accents, everything was super impressive, and is by far the greatest strength of the Play As Anyone system. Except when it isn't. As we've all seen over the last few years with AI, it's not always perfect, and in some cases, it looks straight up bad.
The people are gonna back you, DedSec. And so am I. You can pull on me if you think I can be of help. Anytime. Cheers.
Just remember that in case we ever holler you looking for help.
When approaching another NPC, my character's mouth will look distorted, their words sounding more robot than human. And hey, let's talk about the dialogue. Here's the average interaction between two individuals during a recruitment process. Thank character for helping. Acknowledge, offer invite to DedSec. Accept invitation. That is the formula. And while I am not saying they need to get into hyper-specific details, once you see this interaction enough times, the pattern becomes game-breakingly clear. Why is it game-breaking? Because it takes what are supposed to be humans and makes them even more like drones. I understand that using AI is a necessity to achieve Ubisoft's grandiose ambitions, but I again have to wonder at what point are the sacrifices needed to uphold this system too great? The novelty is all that's here. Oh wow, this person sounds like White Light. Ooh, an Indian accent. Very daring. I'm even subtly impressed that there's a considerable amount of British slang mixed in here, but it does make me terrified of a potential Watch Dogs game in Toronto. Wagwan fam, that CTOS tower has been causing my hood bare stress. Crody, could you take that ting down? Okay, I'm sorry, that was so bad. The robotic interactions between characters are one of the leading causes of disconnect within the world. Furthermore, the procedural generation isn't as in-depth as I would have liked. There were countless times that a character would seem to have an archetype. Let's say the resident hacker, which by the way, having a hacker role in a series about hacking is fucking rich, but she was clearly the introverted type. The hood, the selection screen pose, staring straight down at the phone, the clear disdain for fashion trends. So why then would she be posing for selfies? That seems so, personality-wise, contradictory. Sure, humans are complex and we contradict ourselves all the time, but this feels so immensely out of character. Who are they posing for anyways? The internet, you know, where Albion is looking for them? It doesn't matter that much, but actions like these are unfortunate reminders that this isn't a person. This is a mannequin, dressed up in a random selection of clothing and personality traits with no synergy. The worst part is, in spite of all the randomness, all the probabilities, there were still duplicates. There were plenty of times during my playthrough where I would run into a different character that looked exactly like one I already had, or at times was already using. I understand that this is bound to happen. Hell, in real life, you could come across someone who's dressed the same as you, though it's never happened to me and I live in fucking Vancouver, so it's not like we're lacking density for it. But what this situation does is hurt the illusion. I mentioned this in my videos on the first two games, but the strength of San Francisco and Chicago is that yes, these random NPCs were lifeless technically, but there were enough supplementary details to make believing in their vitality easier. Here, there are situations that make it so much harder. People blip in and out of existence, they find duplicates, they will be a hitman by occupation and yet struggle to take someone down, having no strength or technique compared to the character whose defining trait is being able to down a beer on command. I get it, I've ranted about this system a lot, but I need you to understand, this is the game. Every sacrifice made was in service of this system. Every problem, if you follow the roots, leads back to this system. Watch Dogs Legion is a web of confusion, and at its center is the idea to play as anyone. Normally, I would have suggestions. I don't often criticize without offering a solution. It's never my goal to flat out shit on something without at least offering a better alternative. But I can't. This idea, as proven by the numerous sacrifices that resulted in a system that still doesn't work, is fundamentally flawed and should not have been the basis to create a game around. I rarely say that something fundamentally doesn't work, but in this case, I truly believe it. And as we look at the rest of the game, we'll see why. Remember, this is only looking at the world and how the system interacts with our ability to connect with London. We haven't even talked about the gameplay, story, or what taking back London really feels like. Watch Dogs Legion has a slight problem that a lot of games with oppressive settings have, which is making the game interesting once all the world's problems have been solved. Now, of course, this isn't a big deal. The point of most games is to do exactly that, but it's not quite the case here. Ultimately, the story this time around is about figuring out who Zero Day is and rebuilding DedSec, but fighting the power is often secondary and can be successfully solved before the main missions pick up any steam. The opening of the game does a decent job of setting the stakes. DedSec is framed for setting off bombs all around London, which allows the militia Albion to seize power, creating a city that is at the forefront of Big Brother's surveillance. Drones occupy any view, cameras are everywhere, and the police, Albion, are now as equipped as ever to make life for the average person and DedSec hell. It's clear the goal, at least peripherally, like the first two games, is to take down Bloom, CTOS, and protect the average person. While this was done previously by completing main missions and hacking single CTOS boxes, now we do this by convincing the different boroughs to stand up against the power. This is initially an interesting idea, though its execution leaves a bit to be desired. First, we should start with motivation. Why would we want to liberate London? Why do we care? There's plenty of reasons, with the biggest being that getting around the map and away from Albion in a non-defined borough is consistently tougher than one that has risen up. The most noticeable issue is the checkpoints around the map. Ignoring the fact that you're on an Albion watch list immediately despite just moments ago being contacted by DedSec, if you pass through one of these gates, which are placed at most major junctions or bottlenecks, you'll be given an automatic 2-star wanted level, which early on can be tough to escape from. These checkpoints are initially a pain, but I think they provide an excellent tutorial for the player. When you inevitably speed through one of these, you'll be scrambling to get away from Albion, and you obviously don't run into another checkpoint, so you'll be forced to take back alleys and unorthodox routes away from them. Sometimes this sucked because it meant that I was nearly captured or killed because the only viable escape was through the checkpoints that contained turrets on them. But when slinking through different alleyways and getting around these checkpoints, I realized that while Albion's vehicles are certainly fast, they don't turn very well. If you want to lose the fuzz, the best bet is to make as many sharp turns as possible and not lose them through distance. You can't outrun Big Brother, but to lose them by simply confusing them. This was further drilled into my head by the Albion drones and cars that would spawn out of thin air as I sped down a long road. This was absolute horseshit, but the lesson remained. Take advantage of how claustrophobic London can be. Once a borough is defiant, you'll notice that these checkpoints are shut down, making getting around much easier, and you'll notice that Albion are far less aggressive when hunting you. This makes sense. With the borough defiant, they are spread more thin, and maybe don't have the manpower to operate these checkpoints, and with fewer resources they can as easily track you down. This in itself is a motivation to liberate the boroughs, because it makes life easier for you and makes it appear easier for others. Maybe this is a pure anecdote, and I can't prove if this was intentional, but after making a borough defiant, I noticed less Albion vehicles on the road, less people being arrested for no reason, and less drones in the sky. I truly felt as though I was making an impact on the world, and a lot of the bombastic final pushes for each borough often highlighted a landmark that symbolizes London, and it made me feel like I was actually making a difference. But then we get to the practical side of things, which is now the fun is kind of gone. I know I'm being such a hater with this, but when you liberate a borough, the checkpoints, Albion's presence, they're all turned down. So what used to be an intense means of traversing the city is now just beelining it to your objective. Once London is free, it dies. This feeling is most noticeable when playing the game under certain circumstances, notably resistance mode with permadeath on. I'm not usually one to advocate for a correct way to play a game, but resistance and permadeath mode are the closest I have felt to a difficulty being intended. I mean, it was in the marketing, your character dies permanently, so surely Ubisoft agrees. Except this mode isn't pushed to the player all that well, and I think many chose not to play with it on, and unfortunately, if you've played permadeath mode, then you'll know why once the game launched, permadeath was swept aside. Resistance mode is a difficulty that can be chosen before starting a new game, and it makes enemies see you easier, you take more damage, deal less damage, Albion is harder to shake, and fast travel is limited. I think this mode is the definitive way to play the game because of two reasons. One, it, through the oppressive gameplay, reinforces the themes of the game, specifically DedSec being hunted, on the back foot, and nearly crushed under the weight of Albion's surveillance. Two, Watch Dogs is a series that has always had a plethora of tools for you to use, and by selecting an unforgiving game mode, you can force yourself to engage with tools that you never used before and think more carefully about encounters. That second reason is also why I was recommended by a friend to play with permadeath on. Now, in an ideal world, that friend was right. This is the ideal way to play the game, except that's assuming the gameplay works consistency or sometimes works at all. This is such a tragic thing to say too, because I think if you don't like Watch Dogs Legion, then playing on this mode would be what brings you around to the game, if its systems were strong enough to handle it. But they aren't. I want to begin by looking at the permadeath function, as of course, considering you have different operatives, it functions less like a one-life game mode, like something we saw in Assassin's Creed Mirage, and more like a Pokemon Nuzlocke. And in that latter case, the reason it works is the same. We collect DedSec operatives like Pokemon, spotting them in the wild and then catching them for use on our team. But there's a twist. If they die, then they're gone forever. Because I myself had to work to recruit these people, and at times customize them, I became slightly attached to them. It's why most Nuzlocks force you to nickname your Pokemon. When you have a connection to your team member and you don't want to lose them, then every interaction has weight, because every mistake could have dire consequences. In Resistance mode, since the game was already harder, you can't get away with using your lower skilled recruits, because they won't be able to get the job done well enough. So even small tasks can bear a lot of risk, and if you lose, then you lose not just a good asset, but a part of the team, and that loss is often crushing. When I first played Watch Dogs Legion, I played on classic mode with permadeath off, and death was a minor inconvenience. I never cared much about what was happening, and thus barely remembered my playthrough. This time, I felt more tense than I've ever felt playing a Watch Dogs game, and I was more engaged than ever. You know the idea of the first game setup where you can utilize cameras to get a better view of an area before heading in? I often ignored that, because why bother? If I die, I'll just try again. Here, that's not an option. I, more often than not, did whatever I could to utilize hacking to its fullest extent. I engaged with certain mechanics I otherwise never would have, and when it worked, it was damn near perfection. So many of the mechanics here are given new utility thanks to Resistance mode. In Classic mode, having a Clan Kelly member or an Albion officer on the team was convenient. Here, it's a necessity. When you need to infiltrate an Albion base, you're entering the Lion's Den, and being able to blend with them made me realize that this game, unironically, has the best social stealth in not just the Watch Dogs series, but in the Assassin's Creed series too. I had to plan out a path that let me not get too close to the guards. Hell, some of the characters have actions that aid in your escape, allowing you to blend in too. There are certain get-out-of-jail-free hacks you can use, jamming enemy guns, a watch-bound EMP, and these were all tools I basically forgot about when not in Resistance mode because I never needed to use them, but here, it was integral to survival, and even the most basic of hacks saved my skin on more than one occasion. On one mission, I had to sneak into an Albion base, and was doing so remotely from the top of an unconstructed bridge. Two guards were coming up to investigate, so I hacked the vehicle next to me, causing it to run over one of the guards, and while the other was distracted, I jumped off the side into my objective. Moments like these, or one where, in order to get out of a sticky situation, I hacked a turret to protect myself, were what made the game, and truthfully, my only complaint was the cooldown time. Every hack this time around is on a lengthy cooldown, and while that did mean that I needed to play a bit more strategically, it also meant that in some of the harder stages where hacks like distractions were a necessity, I was waiting around for the cooldown to finish. It's especially annoying during chases or drone fights. You can only disable a drone, hijack it, or cause it to fight for you so many times, and using guns isn't viable because you die so fast, which led to many moments of frustration. Like, at least cut down the hijack cooldown or allow me to stockpile an extra one. With these added restrictions and with the bigger consequences, most stealth encounters are entire ordeals that go through some obvious steps. Hacking cameras to identify tools within the environment, enemy positions, as well as any entry and exit points. Most strongholds have a secret entrance, either through a roof access vent or through an underground tunnel. Finding these was the perfect reward for being observant, and elevated the feeling of being a hacker super spy. Then there are decisions to enter with the spider bot or your person, either of which are going to have their strengths and weaknesses. Where the spider bot has no means of permanently removing threats, it has the low detectability and high expendability that makes it worthwhile. Often, a combination of both will be needed for success, and generally, the stealth here is really good. Enemies detect you fast, but not too fast, and they investigate sounds and are exceptionally forgiving when alerting other guards. A large issue with stealth in Watch Dogs 2 was that if an enemy spotted you, even dogs, the rest of the base would be instantly alerted to your position. Here, if spotted, you'll probably enter a fistfight with the person who spotted you and anyone nearby, but the game is very forgiving with that range, and even more so if you kite the enemies to a more secluded arena. Seeing this change here made stealth a lot more fun and a lot more forgiving, which is actually a running theme. You can jam enemy guns, cut their comms, distract them, shock them, go invisible for God's sake. There's a lot you can do to give yourself a second chance, and initially, I assumed that this was because the game would be hard. No. These self-saving abilities are simply a band-aid for the real issue, which is the gameplay isn't very consistent. I don't say this lightly. The Watch Dogs Legion gameplay might be genuinely one of the buggiest Ubisoft systems I have ever used. And the fact it was the first one with a permadeath mode would be a really great joke if it wasn't on us. I need to clarify, this next bit is speculation, but I think a large reason the permadeath mode was made toggleable was because during playtesting, their systems were so inconsistent that players could not help themselves but die to some unbelievable shit. Why do I think that? Because it happened to me. A lot. I seriously cannot begin to fathom how so many character ending issues are in this game, and granted, sometimes I died because of a skill issue. I will gladly admit that. But then there were plenty where I died because not just one, but multiple systems that I am meant to rely on failed. Let's look at one example on a rooftop with what was, at the time, my favorite character. She walks up, turns off a drone, sends a text to the guy in front of her, meaning his vision cone is gone for a moment. Note that our character is unarmed. As I approach and press the X input to do a takedown, indicated by the game instructing me to do so, instead, I punch the enemy, causing me to be detected not just by him, but by the other guard a few feet away. Said other guard instantly pulls out their gun, which is not supposed to happen. Then, I assume because my camera is now facing the guard pumping me full of lead, my character swings in their direction, obviously missing, the guard rolls backwards, and I am shot dead before I have the opportunity to run away, being cock-blocked by the bar instead of vaulting over it. Looking at this clip, we can see 3 different systems that have failed, causing the death of this operative. However, it is also true that I could have acquired the upgrade that lets me jam an enemy's gun sooner. I could have used a spider bot that can't be permanently lost. I could have instantly run away once detected instead of remaining within the fistfight, and lastly, I could have fired back. But the problem is, half of those solutions require me to plan for those systems to fail, when the game has made it abundantly clear that I am not supposed to do that. This is merely the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about the preventative measures. There are ways to avoid this situation, jamming weapons, disrupting comms, even using the environment to draw the attention of enemies. But the problem is, these are hacks that are purchased from the tech lab. Think about basically any baseline hack you had in the first 2 games. It's now behind an upgrade that is applied to every character. These are less about ways of using the environment to your advantage and more about actually being able to play the game. One of the upgrades, of course, is just letting you take more damage, which already feels out of place, but then there are non-lethal weapons which occupy a quarter of the wall. Then there are drone hacks. A majority of your upgrades will go here because if a riot drone approaches and you don't have a way of disabling it, then it comes down to a numbers game and you will lose that game. Oh, Aqua, just take cover. Yeah, take cover from the drone that can fly right over said cover and shove its gun so far up my ass I am coughing up gunpowder. So a lot of these upgrades are essential. And yes, that does mean that as the game goes on, it gets easier. But not because I was getting better, but because I had enough guardrails to prevent the game from stepping out of line and fucking me. What most disappoints me about the tech tab is that these are upgrades applied to all characters. The aforementioned hooligan, whose defining trait is being able to slam a pint, is now able to remote control any drone just as well as the resident hacker. The getaway driver now takes just as many bullets as the armor-clad Albion soldier. The game feels terrified of making any one character too unique. While yes, I praise the social stealth with certain characters wearing disguises, but that's all we get. Oh, a spy has a silenced weapon. Well, we can upgrade the stun gun to be silenced. Oh, the construction worker could summon a drone. And yeah, so can everyone else if they hack a drone terminal, which is always nearby any objective on the map. This was something Ubisoft was concerned about during development, making sure every character was capable of completing every task. But I feel that this again comes at a heavy cost, because instead of each mission being completed in unique ways, they all feel so similar in execution, and your character's unique abilities often go completely uncapitalized on. I had an operative that had faster download speeds and could complete said things from farther away, and on many missions it made no difference because I still had to go in person to my objective, or the objective was completable without that added bonus. There's an obvious solution to this. Make certain skills and builds a requirement for missions. Have the game not let you start until a specific kind of operative is recruited, but then we run into a different issue, pacing. If we force players to start and stop over and over, having to do 20-minute side quests before each mission, then we'll make players feel like they are stuck doing busy work and jumping through hoops. This could potentially be alleviated by introducing a tutorial mission that introduces you to the different kinds of operatives, or better yet, when choosing the first 3 at the beginning of the game, ensure players start with operatives that cover a wide range of movesets, opting to be jacks of all trades, meeting their requirements to complete all objectives but not efficiently, which should then encourage players to seek out better operatives. This solution would require changing the game too much, so it's not like this really means anything, but the point remains. Despite being able to play as anyone can do everything. What further doesn't help with the gameplay is that level design is generally by the numbers. Look, I know in a lot of Ubisoft games, specifically Far Cry, a lot of the game can be outposts. Some are actually called outposts, but others are called heists or infiltrations, where you're essentially doing the same thing. Head to an area, clear it out, grab something, and that same formula is present here. The reason I consider that formula a problem here is that the mechanics are not deep or reliable enough to make that formula excusable. It's the same thing. Enter a base, stay in stealth for as long as possible, get spotted, engage with the combat, and then inevitably engage with guns. Speaking of which, let's look at what that entails. Hand-to-hand combat has so much potential, and yet it's just a counter simulator. Okay, that's a little reductive. Essentially, there are 3 moves: punch, counter, and guard break. Punching is usually blocked, so you'll need to guard break, and when an enemy attacks, you can dodge and immediately counter with an attack. Simple enough. And then the takedowns when an enemy is at low health are fun, but here's the catch. The enemy AI makes fights generally repetitive. If knocked over, they will almost always get up with an attack, and of course a counter attack knocks them to their knees, so I'm sure you see the pattern. Sometimes they will block all the time. This means that even if you perform a guard break, they will still block follow-up attacks. And since guard breaks don't do much damage, the best way to beat them is to play defensively. Playing defensively would work if there was a parry button or a proper block, but there isn't, so instead we just sit there pressing the same 2-button combo over and over again. But wait, there's more. Since melee combat is the safest way to approach any encounter, you'll be doing it a lot. Why is it the safest? Well, combat is generally easier. I mean, look at this. And also, because believe it or not, the shooting is perhaps the most unreliable part of this game. Shooting in all the Watch Dogs games was just fine. It was fine in the first game and even in the second, though I never used it much there. Here, not only is recoil insane, but the guns are inaccurate even at close range, and the aim assist is so overtuned that it resulted in countless close calls. Let's talk about aim assist for a moment, because yeah, I could have used a mouse, but let's remember that these games are designed for consoles just as much as they are designed for PC. And unfortunately, when I have to use a crowbar to pry my aim away from what the game thinks I'm aiming for, it results in an unfun experience. Certain enemies can go invisible or close to it. This is never explained to you, of course, so I learned the hard way by taking a 12-gauge suppository and losing an operator forever, but fuck it, whatever. The real issue is, even when I kept an eye out and was prepared to shoot at these people, my aim would snap to the visible target and I couldn't get my aim off of them. These invisible enemies often have shotguns and will rush you, so there's no time to waste. And the best part is, you also can't hack them until they exit invisibility. So every time one of these guys shows up, I have to scramble to, the moment they were visible, jam their guns. This is just the beginning too. We could talk about how often peeking even for a second results in you being at extremely low health, meaning most fights were a cycle of fire a few shots, heal, fire more, leading to tedium for no reason. We could talk about how the guns do the bare minimum damage, especially in the later game. We can talk about how in this game where just a few bullets can take you down, the game throws tens of enemies at you that have heat-seeking bomb drones. We can talk about how sometimes when running away, an Albion drone can just say fuck it and nuke your vehicle. But what do I want to talk about the most? It's the hit detection. Watch Dogs Legion has an online mode, and we'll talk about it later, but I need to stress that the single-player campaign is strictly single-player. There are no seamless multiplayer modes, no invasions, which makes sense. That was a fun feature from the last game. Of course it can't be here. And everything that is here is offline. So why the fuck is there a delay on a shotgun? Huh? I mean, God, I'm sorry, I know I'm getting loud, but you need to understand that literally every other minute there is some bullshit here where I thought, how the fuck did anyone think this was stable enough for a permadeath mode? The one counter argument is, it's fine. I mean, in the specific clip I'm showing, I survived that encounter. But it's like, why do I need a second of uncertainty? It makes me think I missed or that there's some sort of glitch and I may need to refire, which is another issue because you can only hold so much ammo at a time. And okay, I'm sorry. We're getting too wild. You can't see me, but I'm straightening my tie, I'm slicking my hair back, and I'm recomposing myself. I know there's an obvious thing I've yet to mention, which is, if you didn't enjoy the permadeath mode and the harder difficulties, then why'd you play with it? The answer is simple. I'd rather be mad than bored. I'd rather feel something than nothing. Plus, when it works, permadeath mode raises the stakes to unbelievable levels. And the reason these issues sting so much is because when they aren't here, I was having a ton of fun. Without permadeath, I didn't feel as attached to my characters. I didn't feel as though anything posed a real danger because death was simply an inconvenience. Permadeath doesn't create these issues, it just makes them easier to see. So I think these critiques are valid even if my anger towards it is less so. To go back to the invasions and seamless multiplayer, you'll notice that there's a lot of gameplay features that just aren't present here, and I can't understand why. Mass hacks are gone. Blackouts, something a character even uses in this game, aren't here, despite it being some of the coolest parts of the other games. Well, it is here, but you need to pay for it. Thanks, Aidan. We can still control vehicles and cranes, but there's a lack of other controllable objects outside of the different classes of drones. Where are the walking robots? Where's the RC jumper? The quadcopter doesn't need to be here because the drones replace it well enough, but where's the ability to set a trap? In fact, at the end of the game, someone sets traps for us, so it's clear these mechanics are in some form here. Our newest remote tool is a spider bot, which is cool. It's a nice callback to the digital trips in Watch Dogs 1, but the hacking here somehow feels almost as bare bones as the first game. How have we regressed so far from Watch Dogs 2? I think the answer is tone. This affects the story heavily too, but the first and second games mechanically were divided by what was at the forefront. Aidan was a shooter first, hacker second. Marcus was a hacker first, shooter second. DedSec in London is somehow neither. They don't have the arsenal or focus ability to be a proper shooter, and they don't have the hacking capabilities to be a proficient hacker, and I don't understand why. Maybe it's the issue of realism. Surely a random person couldn't join DedSec and be given all these new hacks to use in the open world, except that's exactly what Claire did to Aidan. It really could be that simple. This gameplay divide where the game tries to be part hacker flick, part spy thriller, but not being able to commit and thus properly fulfill either, is exactly why I said Watch Dogs 2 created a rift in the series, because now they had to choose, and God knows they were going to take the coward's way out. Even things that should be layups here are squandered. Boss fights? Most boss-like encounters are just waves of enemies, which by the late game is hardly surprising, if challenging. Nigel Cass is one of the few boss fights, and we have to manually move around the map solving buried light puzzles to create an EMP blast that makes him vulnerable. Then we do barely any damage, even with a fucking grenade launcher, and he goes down. Of course, there are enemies that continuously respawn, which the game never tells you, and that's part of the game's challenge. You'll often never be told how something works. You'll just have to find out for yourself. And what that usually means is losing an operator because the game decides on permadeath mode not to tell you that there are invisible enemies with shotguns that will rush you. That's an invisible gun.
Oh my, that's so hard to see.
Yeah, and granted, I feel like some of this, like, it was pretty obvious. Boom, I'm instantly critical. Like,
this is so dumb.
That's what I'm saying. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this? You know, grenader enemies, when killed, will drop a fucking grenade, and this includes stealth. You wanna know how I figured this out? By having my stealth run in a mansion with few exit points compromised by it. Are they sitting there, pin-pulled, hand on the grenade? Really? Or here's a really good one. Clan Kelly has a base I need to infiltrate. I do what I must, but on the way out, I get into a gunfight. I make a break for a car and hit the road. Albion starts getting involved, but they're not aggro on me, hence their blips on the map being white, and hence me not having a wanted level. On the way out, for the only time ever, a drone, I have to assume owned by Clan Kelly, starts approaching me. I can't turn around to hack it because flipping the camera means the game thinks I want to target the parked car instead of the drone behind me, so I just hit the gas. The other reason I do this is because, as established with the chase drones, if a drone is going to fire, they will show a red line, giving me a second to perform some evasive maneuvers. What they also usually do is fly in front of you, because the game knows the camera sucks horse dick, so when a drone flies in front, it's easier to disable. This drone instead fires a fucking bazooka that insta-kills me. And so I'm driving, I'm thinking, okay, he's gonna fucking mess up my controls a little bit. Just wait until you see what he does. Are you fucking kidding me?
Oh, you're so trash.
The point is, I feel like a majority of my deaths were either not my fault, or were the subject of things that I could never predict, or never react to in time. 4 enemies spawning instantly in an empty room, takedowns not working, enemies pulling guns for no reason, takedowns not working, this time on a character that has an ability that grants them instant takedowns. I know I harped on the combat and stealth a lot, but that's because it's all you do. What are there to say about the puzzles? Most of the time, it's guiding a spider bot through a series of vents, and sometimes there's random lasers. Ooh! The actual hacking puzzles are less complex here than they were in Watch Dogs 2, arguably less than Watch Dogs 1, so they left a lot to be desired. This too is why the play as anyone system is flawed, because all of these resources were put towards it, and they left other facets of the game malnourished, and the damn thing doesn't even work. All of their procedurally generated characters, and still, one of the story characters I was tasked with sleeping with looked nearly identical to the one I was already using. Is it funny? Sure, but it's not trying to be, so I find it hard to give the game much credit for it. But don't worry, there are plenty of times where the game is intentionally trying to be funny, and those fail too. The story of Watch Dogs Legion starts out fine enough, but it's clear literally from the first few minutes that it's doomed for one reason. Tone. The tone of a story, and a game as a whole, dictates not just how scenes need to be played out, but how scenes will be interpreted. Marcus and crew could get away with their one-liners all the time because the story and tone of that game was more laid back. Did people still appreciate that tone? Not entirely, but the game was consistent. However, those who disliked the second game's tone the most were those that played the first game, where melancholic was Aidan's middle name. Everything about the game was sad, and the happiest ending anyone got was Aidan, who lost his family, his friends, was betrayed, and still had a dead niece. Sure, he felt relief after avenging her, and I think the game was so cool for actually letting revenge be the viable solution, but to say he won is a stretch. What we also saw in the first game was how overbearing this new technology could be in the wrong hands. Where Watch Dogs Legion succeeds is following the evolution of that technology. Chicago saw the introduction of that technology and what it can control. Streetlights, computers, cameras, and it set up something important: data as ammunition. San Francisco saw CTOS gathering that information from the public and utilizing said data to influence society. Certain people were charged for crimes they didn't commit, denied healthcare before they applied, and we saw technology be systematically used to keep people in their place economically. The bottom stays on the bottom, and the higher-ups keep ascending. Legion looks at the actual mobilization of that idea. Now, with all the data and with all the tech, Albion can truly start controlling people in more overt ways. Microchips, drones that can kill someone from out of the sky. There will be no running. No more staying off the grid. A lot of this is told to us. In fact, given the first few minutes, our introduction is entirely told to us. Dalton, someone we're supposed to care about, is attempting to stop some bombs in Parliament, but is unsuccessful because of an organization called Zero Day that not only kills Dalton, but destroys London's DedSec, including their charismatic leader, Sabine. The setup is simple. Help a surprisingly survived Sabine rebuild DedSec, find out who's responsible for Zero Day, and clear DedSec's name. The story follows a chapter structure where we get clues about who Zero Day is, like how Clan Kelly is tied to them, and then investigate Mary Kelly to figure out what her involvement was while also stopping the nefarious plans. The story gets better as it goes on, especially when the first mission sees us reconstructing some scenes in AR, which gameplay-wise is really boring. We just sit around watching stuff, and eventually this does lead to our first official chapter, but I certainly felt like the story took a while to get moving, especially when, setup-wise, its opening was strong. I was curious, who's Zero Day? And I appreciated that a lot of the NPCs were affected by these bombings, losing family members in the process. As the story goes through its different chapters, all surrounding a figure or faction, you'll notice two consistent themes. The first is that the tone is all over the place, not just thematically, but in the writing, the delivery, and the story as a whole. What this struggles in tandem with is the other consistent issue, which is that, sometimes, it works extremely well. As stated when talking about the gameplay, there are pockets of Watch Dogs Legion that made me understand Ubisoft's vision. Moments that almost make the ends justify the means, where I felt that all the sacrifices to gameplay, our characters, were worth it. But those moments are fleeting, and in their wake is a grim reminder of what's left. These moments make the mistake of raising the bar, showing us that the mediocrity that it's sandwiched between was not just the best they could do, it's just the best they did. Let's talk about Sky Larson, because plot-wise, it was the moment where things clicked, but it also showcases how tone can play a role in removing us from scenes. Eventually, after some investigating, we're brought to the home of Sky Larson to find her. When inside, we see that she has a house AI, and that her home is very sanitized despite being absent for the last 2 years. We've also been told by one of our connections that there's something sinister within her home. After descending an elevator, we enter a strange bunker containing a home and a garden, and the site is genuinely beautiful. There's sadly a gravestone for a dog named Ada, and yet we still hear a dog. We see some memories of Sky and her mother. Her mother had a terminal disease, and this home was a gift from Sky to her, even though she hates it. As we move through the different rooms, the home becomes more and more disturbing, the house AI becoming more distorted. Our first instinct is to follow the dog's barks, but that's not a dog. Finally, we discover that Sky was trying to convince her mother to have her conscience uploaded, but her mother would rather die a human than live on outside of her vessel. Sky didn't like that answer, and sedated her defenseless mother, uploading her to the house AI. Sky's mother didn't have eyes anymore, she couldn't see, but she could still cry, and the sobbing drove Sky to delete different parts of her mother's communicative abilities until she was left as nothing more than a slave. When we find this, the house, Sky's mother has one final request: unplug her and let her die in peace. This is the only way she will reveal where Sky is. This entire segment is perfect. The story being told, the implications of a neural upload, the way Skye sees her mother as an experiment, and the way she discarded her after failing to make her content with her new life. It was powerful. I've played Legion 3 times now, and every time I am deeply disturbed when the home, stringing together pre-made phrases like a spoken ransom note, begs to be released. But, as I said, this highlights tonal issues, because the first thing your character says when entering this place is this.
Oh my shitting hell. Are you seeing this?
Come on. I'm being 100% serious when I say this. Watch Dogs Legion's best moments are when it takes itself seriously, allows a shred of dignity, and when its characters shut the fuck up. It's so sad that the best moments of the game are where the story takes itself seriously, and I need to be clear. The issue isn't that there's humor here. The issue is when and how. For as much as people hated Watch Dogs 2's humor, it at least took itself seriously, and had moments where characters would show some sincerity. And look, those moments are here, and said moments are the highlights, but many of those moments are undercut because they are between scenes that are comically poor, and not because we're laughing with the game. The most stark contrast is between Bagley and Sabine. Sabine feels like she's from Watch Dogs 1. She's always gloomy, dressed in black, delivering her lines without much enthusiasm, which makes sense. She's the only surviving member of the old DedSec. She's grieving. Then, the more prominent member of DedSec, Bagley, the Jarvis-esque AI assistant to the group, is always cracking jokes and rarely delivers a line without some kind of sass. In his case, because it's so clearly part of his personality and because of his own disconnect from the situation, his humor ironically feels the most human. Bagley feels like Watch Dogs 2 all the way from the humor that was of the game's tone to the synthetic voice, drawing immediate comparisons to Wrench. Even the people you interact with, Caitlin Lau, Naut, and Hamish, are all interesting characters that take themselves seriously, but the biggest disconnect always comes from the player character. So let's bear in mind that there will always be variation to characters and their delivery due to their procedural generation. It's technically statistically possible, albeit highly improbable, that every character I gathered, which was close to 50, all had the same smug delivery. But I'm going to make a guess that all characters talk like this. What does this sound like? Well, to better understand, let's see what it looks like. In an effort to track down Caitlin Lau, we follow the trail of organ harvesters, and upon falling on top of a pile of bodies, our character scurries back in horror, a reasonable reaction. Then, the very next words out of their mouth was this.
Nice skills. How are you feeling? That guy was ready to slice you open.
You know that feeling you get where your peripheral fades away, your thoughts of the outside world drift, and your full attention is on a story because it feels like it's getting good? I felt that going into this. But this line and the subsequent conversation was so jarring, but the game could have crashed to achieve the same sense of complete immersive corrosion. This is a point I could hammer home over and over again, but for the sake of brevity, for as ironic as it seems, I'll leave it here. With each chapter there's a villain. Skye Larson, Mary Kelly, Nigel Cass, and they're all built up to be generally evil, though starting with Mary Kelly to me was a weak choice, because she is by far the weakest. The greatest problem is that Kelly is so evil that it borders on comical. She screams at her victims about bottom lines and calls them merchandise to their faces, mocking their desires to go back to their homes. It's hard to decide if it's the delivery that's wrong or if conceptually it's too evil to even comprehend. An immediate comparison is to Lucky Quinn, who I felt was much better, not just because his evil is more subdued, despite being just as pure, but also because his motivations made more sense. He trafficked humans for money, yeah, but he was also looking for power, and his other schemes made that much clearer. The whole reason he was evil was not because he enjoyed picking apart the lives of Aidan and Maurice, but because he simply didn't care. Progression throughout the story while starting small is quite good. I never felt like DedSec was just spinning their wheels. Sure, the identity of Zero Day isn't clear until the end, but following the trail of connections was engaging enough, and as we inch closer to the end, the game throws a potential candidate our way to tease us towards the big reveal. Before that happens though, we get one of our only official boss fights against Nigel Cass. I don't think the fight was all that good, especially when again there are respawning enemies, but narratively, it was fine. Cass's character as a whole was interesting enough, but again, his cartoonishly evil performance, shooting someone right in the head the moment they disagree, undermines any seemingly noble motivation. What intrigued me about Cass was that upon first introduction, he seemed to head Albion and their oppressive approach to crime because he truly cared. We learned that his father was murdered, and this sent him on an obsessive spiral, leading to Project Themis, the drones capable of stopping crimes instantly and before they happen. This system is flawed, no question, but it makes Nigel not to be a bad guy, just the wrong guy. This could have made for an interesting dynamic between DedSec and Albion. There's an argument to be made for Albion's existence too. Technology has taken over London, there are more homeless than ever with how many many jobs are being automated, and with more people being desperate, there's likely more crime. Now, of course, we can't expect the government to curb economic crisis, and realistically, it's hard to motivate people to rally behind fixing the economy because economic issues don't affect enough people. The upper class don't care that minimum wage is below living wage, for example, because it really doesn't affect them. Crime, however, is something everyone hates, so it's easy to push the blame on crime, and instead of attacking the systemic reasons why people commit crimes, we just attack the criminals. Now, DedSec could act as the antagonist to this position, as they have in the past when discussing the higher patrol rates and shoot-on-sight orders police were given to the low-income neighborhoods of San Francisco. Maybe their stance here is that harshly punishing criminals won't lead to actual reform because most criminals aren't committing these crimes out of desire. They're often disadvantaged in some way and feel that the only way to make ends meet or to get ahead is to steal, kill, or do whatever else it takes. DedSec could argue that people in poverty are more likely to do these things, and thus, yes, more arrests would be made in those areas, meaning crime reports are up, thus justifying the increased police presence leading to a cycle. Then, Cass could explain that with all these drones, all neighborhoods could be monitored equally, and fuck me, I'm just writing a new story. My point with this is that even if it's a surface level argument, actually having the game talk about this stuff, hell maybe even taking a stance on it, would make the game more interesting and give it more to chew on. I mentioned that I disagree with the way DedSec wanted to handle the injustices Bloom introduced in Watch Dogs 2, but I enjoyed that story nonetheless, because the game actually had something to say. Here, I feel it hardly says much at all. In fact, the game even tells you that the group doesn't know what it wants.
We both use violence and manipulation to shape London into something better. The only difference is I know what I want it to be. Strong, stable, unified, safe. This is what I value. What about you?
To be honest, I don't know. But I'm gonna stop you anyway.
DedSec here can feel like they are fighting the power for the sake of it, and moments like this make me wonder what the fuck all of it's for. Fortunately, that question is answered quickly enough, and the answer is 0 Day. After stopping Cass, the crew gets together for a final celebration, and I really enjoyed this not just because we got to see all of our characters together, but because we see that they now have stories. When profiling our characters, we can see the exact tasks they did for DedSec, and I think that was a really nice touch, even if the party is interrupted by some unsettling information. We discover after stopping Cass, Larson, and Kelly that all the technology we were storing in the DedSec database was actually stolen by 0 Day, who has reappeared and is claiming to do a hard reset on society. 0 Day claims that all of this new technology has turned London into a generally worse place, and it's hard to argue with that part. However, their solution is to destroy that technology, killing people in the process, but benefiting the survivors. It's pretty obvious why we would oppose that, killing bad and all, but I wonder why Sabine is so confident that it's going to work. By the way, 0 Day is Sabine, fuck it. Does Sabine think she'll be able to take down the whole world's network? Does she believe that people will just forget how to make these machines again? Historically speaking, this never worked. If there's one thing I learned from my history degree, it's that London has a surprisingly lengthy history with people pissing in public. Also, when the Industrial Revolution was revolutionizing or something, there was this group of textile workers that were breaking the new machines because it took their jobs and assumedly produced things of a worse quality. The very device you're watching this video on is proof that their acts were in vain. You can't stop progress, and Sabine should have known this. We don't even need to look at history to see more examples. Think about how many grocery stores have introduced self-checkout machines. Those machines are taking away jobs from a generation that is already struggling to find one. Look at how much AI has progressed in the last 2 years alone. AI-generated songs, videos, images, it's already too late. There's so much content online that is made entirely by AI. Hell, entire channels are run by people using a fake voice, fake videos, and for as much as I won't use that in my videos because I truly believe that when it comes to content, we'll see a renaissance of videos that contain a significant human element, I can't stop that progress. It's frustrating, but there's simply nothing we can do because most of us aren't in positions to decide who is replaced and who isn't. We simply will be the ones replaced. The best we can do is to find new ways to be useful. I think, aside from the death aspect of it, Sabine is fighting for a noble cause, and one that generally aligns with DedSec already, which makes her a good villain, and remarkably, the most grounded of all the villains. This reveal, the escape, and generally the final moments of the game was another moment where Legion hit a stride. It was also where I noticed that we never need to actually utilize our team. Once the tutorial chapter is complete, assuming you've recruited a female Albion officer, which isn't that hard to find, there are no missions you cannot do. Also, you never need to utilize more than one team member at once. In this instance, when you do, it made me feel like I was actually part of a larger team, though being able to choose who the other team member was would have been nice, as the character the game selected was brutally ill-equipped for the mission. Said mission sees one person tracking down Sabine and the other heading to the servers that stored Bagley, as Sabine is using the Bagley AI to destroy London. Sabine, now that the cat is out of the bag, delivers an amazing performance and seems to be genuinely as shocked at the player's stupidity as we are. My god, our character, upon seeing 2 drones trained on them, puts their weapon down. That's fair. However, then they look at their weapon as it falls off the building and gives a reaction like, ooh, geez, that was not supposed to happen. Then, the game tries to be humorous with this scene.
Are you just incredibly stupid?
Do you want me to access the transmitter while you socialize?
Yes. Yes! You're incredibly stupid! Wonderful!
But it completely fails because, as established just seconds earlier, clearly our character is stupid. Sabine, after we turn the drones off, is left to die, and I really like that she ultimately lets go, because it shows a greater resolve in her philosophy. She doesn't care if she's around to see what she feels is a better future, so long as it happens. I have seen speculation that Sabine may have survived because we technically don't see a body, but that is a really long fall, and if she did somehow survive through landing on a cargo drone, surely our player character would have reacted instead of dropping the shittiest one-liner ever.
How's that for a hard reset?
Oh, also, they said this just before.
We're watchdogs.
Fuck me. While this is happening, we swap to a different character and shut down the Bagley servers. This was the most emotional moment in the game, and honestly, it's because Bagley was the most human character we interacted with for an extended period of time. Sabine became less and less prevalent as she went on, and never seemed to care much for if we lived or died outside of fulfilling her ulterior motive. In that regard, I suppose she performed that well. But what's worse is that, as you keep pulling out server cores, we see Bagley's mind start to deteriorate. His speech starts slurring, his language more basic, and he even starts showing signs of fear. Bagley knows he needs to do this, but he has second thoughts. Cold feet. It genuinely made me sad. For as much as the NPCs in this game were so clearly AI, having to kill Bagley felt like we were killing the only authentic human in this game. And with Bagley's death, is the end of the game. Through a classic newsfeed credit sequence, we see that to some extent, DedSec was successful. Their names have been cleared, they stopped Zero Day, and while they couldn't stop all the oppressive new technologies, they were able to at least inspire more everyday people to stand up against Albion, Bloom, and any other powers that be. It's one of the first times a Watch Dogs experience ends on a good note, but the post-credit scene shows us that Bagley is in fact still alive. The explanation is complicated, but what's important is that any emotional response from killing him not even 10 minutes earlier is completely nullified. On the bright side, I couldn't think about it that much because I realized in this instance that the weird facial hair my character had wasn't weird. It was simply his beard clipping through his jawline. Watch Dogs Legion, you never fail to entertain. Overall, I actually don't think the story fundamentally is that bad. I think a lot of the issues come from execution and the general tone. Of course, being able to play as anyone is part of the issue too, and having a central protagonist with a personality, not just a variation of tone and accent, would help me feel more connected to the world. I think the biggest offender is that tone, because even games like Watch Dogs 2, where the story isn't amazing, or hell, even the first game where I had a slew of criticisms, had consistent tone. The vibes were consistent, and I could find myself immersed in that, if nothing else. Watch Dogs Legion, at so many points, feels incapable of taking itself seriously, and for as outlandish as that ending can be, and for as much as it dives into science fiction that is otherwise unheard of in this series, they were the highlights because the game treated those moments, mostly, with respect. And this extends to the side content too. A lot of the side content here is pretty run-of-the-mill. I wouldn't call it bad, in fact, I liked it, but it doesn't stray from the game's base formula. Boxing leagues ask you to engage in melee combat, many infiltrations ask for stealth, and maybe you'll hack a few things along the way. But there's one mission that may just be my favorite mission in the game. Upon completing the story, Bagley mentions that they have started noticing gaps in their knowledge, assuming them to be some kind of memory from a past life. If we go to 8 different locations and snap a photo of a landmark, we get an audio log that tells the story of someone named Bradley. Bradley loved rowing, but couldn't do it after beginning to suffer from seizures. His sister Sky, a talented scientist, was able to cure his epilepsy, and right as Bradley was going to start his life again, he developed early onset dementia. Sky spoke to Bradley about neural mapping, and the story ends with him continuing to undergo treatment for his dementia in a hotel, as Sky didn't want any hospitals involved. It's clear that Bradley was the sister of Sky Larson, who we killed. His hotel is prepaid until the time of his death, and upon entering, we can allow Bagley to talk with Bradley and explain that even though his life was cut short and is not what he wanted it to be, he still, in some way, lived on. This was a really great epilogue for the game, and confirmed exactly why Bagley was so human for an AI. It was another moment where Legion put the comedy aside and acted with sincerity, and it was probably my favorite moment in the game, especially considering how it built upon my other favorite moment, which was when we learned about Sky Larson and her mother. Maybe you're just one of the few that can't get enough of Legion though, and in that case, I have good news and bad news. The good news is, the game has 2 online modes. Bad news news is, they hardly work. Let's start with online. My expectations for Watch Dogs Online was very high because GTA Online has been so good that I still play it over a decade later. I don't need the same depth of a game with 10 years under its belt, and I know GTA Online didn't start great, but still, I was hoping for a lot. The bar, however, was low. All we needed were invasions, some PvP modes, and the ability to free roam with friends. So how does the game fare? Not well. For a game so futuristic, it's awfully ironic that there is lag everywhere. If you're a passenger, you'll be sliding around the road. If trying to interact with something, you'll notice buttons are hit multiple times, sometimes not at all, and plenty of modes will have no players available. I'm sure the invasions were great here, but I wouldn't know because I couldn't connect to anyone, including the people on my friends list, that were playing at the same time. Missions consist of the usual fare, and it's not worth going deeper than that. Coordination where possible is satisfying, but when one teammate is downed, you get about 30 seconds to revive them or else you're back to the beginning of the mission, at times losing 10 minutes worth of progress. This made the levels frustrating, especially when some of those deaths weren't the player's fault, and were instead the fault of the servers. This made all of the missions extremely unfun, because we were constantly playing around with this jank that was already layered on top of the usual Legion jankiness. Walking up to an enemy, seeing the takedown button but instead meleeing them. Yeah, that's still here. But what is also still here, interestingly enough, is the ability to play as anyone. Thanks to purchasing the Season Pass, I had some prestige operatives. Operators that are not pay to win, but pay to stand a significantly greater chance. Fun. I figured for a mode like this, they would let us create our own character, but instead we get research points by completing missions, and then use those points to instantly unlock new characters. This removes some of the immersion that's supposed to come from the play as anyone system, but I understand if that system is too ambitious to function in an online mode. As you play, you can also earn rewards through free battle passes on its 20th season, which was surprising to see it supported for so long. But if you need a little more variety, then you can try Legion of the Dead, a separate zombie mode that was pretty boring. I say this with all due respect, but this was just not for me. I mean, even conceptually, I couldn't care less about this. According to Ubisoft, this was a passion project for the devs, and hey, I can't hate on that, but I didn't find this very fun. It's a lot of the same stuff, except you start with worse operatives, making simple things like drones extremely challenging, and the hordes of zombies that can swarm you make any kind of traversal something you need to think about. There were some fun moments, like when running away from a massive horde only to climb onto something right in the eye of an undead storm, but otherwise, I felt disappointed by this. Your goal is to head around the map collecting supplies and then exfiltrating, and this loop could be great for the people that love Legion, but given that this whole mode is built upon the mechanical foundations for Legion that I already don't like, and then also have server issues, I was happy to not put much time into this. You know, I kept hammering on about this idea that Legion is at its best when it sticks to a consistent tone and takes itself seriously, and whenever I vented my frustrations with this story, I would be told over and over that you just have to play Bloodline. Story sucked? Play Bloodline. Don't like not having a central character? Play Bloodline. Want a proper sequel to the stories and characters you love? Play Bloodline. Well, that's certainly a lot for a single DLC to live up to, but to my surprise, those people were right. Bloodline, more than anything, was a glimpse into an alternate future. A different Watch Dogs, one not bogged down by overambitious gimmicks or too afraid of its own setting to take itself seriously. Bloodline is exactly what Watch Dogs Legion could have been, and who knows, maybe it's what the series could be moving forward. I need to preface this discussion by saying that while I am going to praise a lot about Bloodline, it is still a story built upon the foundation of Watch Dogs Legion, so it can only be as good as that foundation allows it to be. I still had moments of frustration where an enemy teleports in front of me, but I was more likely to excuse that because 1, I wasn't playing on permadeath, so death wasn't a big deal, and 2, the rest of the DLC was good enough for said good things to outweigh the bad. Sure, there are still problems here, but what this DLC also shows is that Ubisoft still has it in them. After playing Legion, I thought, had Ubisoft forgotten what Watch Dogs seemed to be all about? Have they forgotten what the series' strengths were? Is it even possible to bring the series back from certain doom? This is their answer, and it's a good one. Unlike the base game, Bloodline stars an actual protagonist, Aidan Pearce, who, in Chicago, don't look at the environment, okay, trust me, this is definitely not London. He gets a job from none other than Jordy, who tells him that there's a high-paying gig in London. Since that's where Jackson lives now, Aidan thinks he can not only get enough money to retire, but to reconnect with Jax. All he has to do is sneak into a place called Brokatech and steal something called the Broka Bridge. As this job is nearly complete, it seems the tech is stolen by none other than Wrench. After giving chase and being captured, the head of Brokatech, Rempart, assumes Aidan to be working with Wrench, and threatens Jackson. Aidan eventually strikes a deal where he will bring the tech so long as Jackson isn't hurt, and our manhunt begins. Immediately, this DLC has reasonable stakes, and utilizes our previous connections to characters to make those stakes high. It's not simply the fate of a group of randos, it's the fate of a character we already care about. Further, we get an excuse to hear from Jackson, who was previously mute during the events of the first game. He does eventually speak near the end of Aidan's story, but now is having full conversations with him. We get to see the effects Lena's death had on Jackson, and what it was like seeing your uncle slaughter people in the name of protecting people that never wanted that protection in the first place. It was nice seeing how this sentiment turned Jackson into someone who wanted to be able to protect himself whenever possible. Once Aidan catches up with Wrench, we find out that Wrench and Rampart were developing the Broker Bridge together, but Rampart cut Wrench out at the last minute, so while Wrench wants to help Aidan, he can't exactly hand over the device, as it can be used to pilot military robots remotely. When Aidan tracks Wrench down, he gets the Broker Bridge and brings it to Rampart, releasing a now captured Jackson in the process. It's then revealed that it's actually a decoy. In the ensuing battle, Aidan is shot and slips into a coma, and thanks to the help of an eavesdropping Sky Larson, we learn that the only way to wake him up is to use the Broker Bridge to enter his mind. Once waking up, the crew leaves and Wrench hunts down Rampart to get revenge, though spares him after heeding Aidan's advice. For as much as the story is short, only a few hours, it moves very quickly and is complicated enough for this DLC to feel like a proper expansion. There were no moments that stood out to me as time wasted, especially when compared to Legion's main story, which felt like one sidetrack after another while trying to deduce who Zero Day was. The other strength of the story, and I know I've said this word 21 times by now, is tone. Tonally, I figured Legion could have gone in the direction of either Doom and Gloom of Chicago or the upbeat sunshine of San Francisco. It's clear their decision for the base game was to blend the two into a whole new identity that I hated. This time, they made a marriage between the two, with Aidan and Wrench operating at completely different sides, and Jackson acting as a mediator between the two, making sure one mood or vibe doesn't overpower the other. This split is helped by playing as the two characters, and while most of the game is playing as Aidan, I think that makes sense given that while both characters are likable, Aidan actually has unfinished business I believe players wanted to see. I wish we saw this approach in the main game, and I truly believe it would have resulted in a far better story. That doesn't mean there aren't problems here. Wrench has a lot of unfinished business that is alluded to the point where I wonder why so much of it was left to audio logs. Essentially, he had a boyfriend, had a falling out, and due to the stress, has regressed back into the Wrench persona after eventually being comfortable enough to live life outside of it after the events of Watch Dogs 2. Throughout the ending moments, Aidan tries to convince Wrench that revenge isn't the only way to go. And that is noble and all, but I wish the game explored more how this ideology shifted. I don't know if sparing Maurice is canon, though I do believe it is, but what we do know is that Aidan felt better after taking down Quinn. Now, obviously that relief is temporary, but having the game explore what made him realize this was, and how that led to his newer mindset would have been nice. The biggest connection we have is within his mind. The moments moving through Aidan's mind were absolutely brilliant. Seeing how the ghosts of his past literally haunt him, and seeing a visual representation of what that was like was excellent. Burying his Fox persona was a nice touch, and a central theme. Aidan's getting older, he can't take a bullet like he used to, and so him looking for an exit strategy makes sense. I would have liked to hear from Nikki, but I wonder at what point we're asking for too much from a relatively small DLC. Keep in mind, it isn't simply an Aidan story, but a Wrench story too, and they both have their own side missions to stifle their lore. Bloodline still wants to emphasize the people of London, and they do so in a few ways. For one, due to not being able to recruit anyone, everyone is now brought back down to the same level of being people, and feeling more like people, because they now have easily accessible dirty secrets. One doctor I looked at had a weird feeling that they never got checked out, and again, these details mean nothing, but that mundanity is what makes it so intriguing. Of course, this information was available in the base game, but you had to access a whole other menu for it, which defeats the idea of having that information at a glance. But to keep connected with the people, Aidan and Wrench obtain their respective upgrades through helping the different people of London, or more accurately, the different members of DedSec. These missions were generally fine, much like the side quests in the base game, though putting upgrades behind these was a wise idea, as I would much rather engage in actual stories than run around the map grinding tech points. Where the later side quests succeeded most is in bringing back fan favorites. Jordy makes a phone appearance during the campaign and in a few side quests for Wrench. Wrench doesn't have as many side operations as Aidan, but his were far more fun, seeing us in a hackathon, blowing shit up, and generally doing things we never did anywhere else in London. But then, once all the others are finished, you get a call from an old friend. I wish we could have seen him in person, but at least hearing from Marcus and knowing that he and Wrench are still tight was really nice. Maybe it's the nostalgia, after all Watch Dogs 2 was a long time ago now, but this was by far my favorite mission because of the chemistry between Wrench and Marcus that hasn't skipped a beat, and because the mission design was abundantly fun and goofy. It's clear Ubisoft still has that Watch Dogs 2 vibe within them, and this mission is a perfect display. So yeah, people were right. Where Watch Dogs Legion had brief 20-minute windows of a fun time, Bloodline was the opposite. It almost made me more disappointed with the base game because this was a glimpse into what could have been. A game with more consistency, a game with more fun, and a game with more heart. Ironically, Given how minimal the procedurally generated aspects of Legions are here, this DLC overall feels more human. Because it was so human, I was able to appreciate parts of the game like never before, and I love this DLC, for as bittersweet as it feels to say. So, that's what they did. Ubisoft found themselves stuck between two fan bases, two completely different games, part of the same series, and their solution was to blend them together, attempting to satisfy both sides. However, on top of this already insurmountable task, Watch Dogs Legion attempted to create a mechanic that would revolutionize the series, making this one of the most ambitious Ubisoft games in recent memory. But I think simply, Ubisoft bit off more than they could chew, and their efforts to sacrifice everything to make playing as anyone work was in vain, and resulted in a game that feels barely anything more than a gimmick. Even if you're interested in the story, you probably don't care about the characters, and if you do, they probably die from the shoddy shooting, the shitty stealth, or the abundance of bugs that led to, at times, permanent death. I actually have one final point to drive home about this, which is that a majority of my deaths in this game were, reasonably speaking, not my fault. This is a bold statement, so we're going to quickly go through all 19 deaths to prove it. Is this going to take a few minutes? Yeah, but the video's over an hour long, the Brevity ship has sailed across the fucking Atlantic at this point, so quickly, before we start, I want to clarify that yes, in some of these scenarios, there are ways to escape, but these options were either not available, or the glitch that caused the death is so egregious that it's unreasonable to expect me to be prepared for it. Okay? Let's go. Starting with Shuthri Saleh, who died because I found out the hard way that a bullet to the head does not in fact kill someone. Cool. Debatable on whose fault it is. Dia Agarwal, death by turret, my fault. Kelly Watson, God, I don't even know where to start, not my fault. Baravi Bajwa, arrested because I was stuck in a chair while spawning in, and an Albion guard thought it'd be cool to beat the shit out of me, not my fault. Caitlin Francis, death by gun, my fault. Katie Toth, after running from Clan Kelly despite running so far that they were blocks away and were off the minimap, they knew my exact location and closed in on me, not my fault. George Juma, fell into a bunch of guns because I couldn't clear an easy gap, shorter than other gaps we've cleared. Not my fault. Sarah Lynch, death by lack of preparation, my fault. Dilapan Saleshi, death by botched stealth, my fault. Quinn McDonald, chase gone wrong, a bit shitty as I hacked the car instead of the person behind them, but I'm comfortable saying I missed, and that is my fault. Amal Nadar, death by guns but I didn't use one so I was unprepared, not my fault. Olusola Bala, death by stairs breaking my abilities, not my fault. Irene Kobayashi, learned the hard way about invisible enemies, not my fault. Lawrence Welsh, death by the takedown sign not meaning takedown, not my fault. Catriona Murray, death by the only fucking bazooka in the game, not my fault. Arivanda Nadar, death by guns, this one stung and it was definitely my fault. Baravi Bajwa, death by the same thing, my fault. Mary Scatliff, okay, it was a hard mission, alright? My fault. Finally, Zachariah Cooper, death by overwhelming force. My fault. Now, if you've been keeping count, that's 9 deaths I consider my fault, and 10 that I consider the game's fault. If we want to be charitable and say the first death was my fault, that is still nearly half of all deaths being something I could not avoid within reason, and most were because there were specific mechanics taught to the player, rules set by the game, that were broken. Permadeath or not, that is unacceptable, especially years later with time to patch things up. Again, when things work, the game is fun, but these bugs, the ones I listed were only the ones that caused death, are so horrendous that it brought down the experience as a whole. Watch Dogs Legion has a central gimmick that isn't worth the sacrifices to the rest of the product. A story that is just fine. Gameplay that is a fight against the game as much as it is against the enemies. And the overall experience is one of the rare times I think a game is flat out bad. I can't even remember the last time I ended any kind of video with the sentiment that a game is bad, but I seriously feel as though I would be lying if I said the overall experience was even fine. Bloodline is a saving grace, but it's not enough. I think this is one of the worst Ubisoft games I have played. I joke a lot about Ubisoft making quote-unquote bad games, and that's a joke, because generally, I like almost all Ubisoft games. Even the ones I don't, I can appreciate what it does well, or at least enough to get over whatever gripes I have. I could not do that here. It's brutal. I was so excited for Legion. I loved the first game, I loved the second game even more, and I genuinely thought there was no way the next entry would somehow be worse. They took away features, minimized the hacking, left the mechanics unpolished, and I simply don't know how that happens. If you like Legion, please don't let this video deter you. I have no authority over this shit. I'm just some baldy with a microphone, and I certainly don't think your taste is inferior or whatever most of the jackasses on this website say when you disagree with them. I know this game has its fans, and that's good, because it means the game isn't for nothing. Someone enjoyed it. If no one liked it, literally no one, then I think it was bad and a waste of effort. These days, a game like this that receives wide negative feedback poses a genuine risk of ending the series. Is this the end of the Watch Dogs series? Was this game enough to kill it? I hope not. I think Legion was a product of the 2 different games that the series started with. But at least now, if the series were to get another entry, Ubisoft would have Legion as a blueprint and a lesson in what not to do. You can't please everyone, and if you try too hard to do so, you might just please no one. My hopes? Something completely different. The reason I love Watch Dogs 1 and 2 is that while they are clearly in the same universe, have similar mechanics, and are both about hacking, their approach to those things are so entirely unique to that location, and the protagonists come from different backgrounds. Marcus is a hacker who specializes in it, using it as a means to fight the power. Aidan uses those same skills as a means to an end with his mercenary work, and to find his own peace. Who's to say the next character has to be either? What's stopping them from making a noir-esque New York Watch Dogs that stars a detective utilizing the intense surveillance to solve a murder that, upon digging deeper, reveals a massive internal conspiracy? Maybe we get a game set in a winter Berlin, where the weather is always extreme, be that heavy winds, blizzards, or torrential downpours. Have it star one of the many within the lower class struggling to survive in these conditions, and have them uncover how Bloom has had a hand in controlling that weather and trying to stop it. These are off the top of my head, but the point is, we don't need to follow an archetype, and if there's one thing Watch Dogs has going for it moving forward, it's that there is no formula. Each game has been so different for better or worse, and that's something we can lean into. At the end of the day though, I'm still left disappointed. I thought talking through my feelings would make me feel at peace with the game, but honestly, I'm still upset. I just wish we could have gotten more. But as is always the case with series like these, the bad ones become easier to love once they're buried by quality sequels. If we get another 2 great Watch Dogs games, then Legion will just be a weird experiment in retrospect. Ubisoft, if you're watching, then 1, sorry, and 2, I think there's still fans of the series who want more, and a future where Legion isn't the end is a future I look forward to.